Chapter 2239. The resumption of Mamie's business was probably the happiest thing for the foodies in Chaos City. Recently, apart from the local customers of Chaos City, there were also many customers who came from all over the world just to try Mamie's food, which had been praised to the skies by all the major gourmet magazines. They had come in high spirits and returned in high spirits. That was how most of the customers felt. However, not everyone could come to Chaos City easily. For example, Vanessa, who was far away in the royal palace in Rodu, couldn't say anything to comfort her mother, even though her eyes were red when she saw her tear-stricken mother. A few days ago, news of victory came from the front lines, but at the same time, another piece of news came, and it was like a bolt from the blue that struck her and her mother's hearts. Josh was dead. Her second elder brother was dead. Although they all said that he was a bad guy, an idiot who sold his soul to the devil, and a bastard who almost destroyed this world, she still remembered him in her memories. However, in her memories, he was a gentle older brother who would secretly bring her delicious food. He was the older brother who would stand up to protect her when others mocked her. She was glad that the Allied army had defeated the undead army and saved the Norland continent from destruction. However, she couldn't feel happy when she heard the news of Josh's death. Her mother loved her second elder brother the most. When she first heard that he had become a devil's puppet, she was already anxious day and night and couldn't sleep. In the past few days, she had been crying every day, and she couldn't eat. She was getting thinner day by day, and her face was pale and yellow. Her heart ached for her mother. "Mother, have some porridge. Let me feed you." Vanessa took a bowl of warm red bean porridge from the palace made beside her. It was the queen's favorite dessert. However, just as the porridge was about to reach the queen's mouth, she smelled the heat and suddenly turned her head to retch. She vomited a few mouthfuls of yellowish acid and waved her hand with a pale face. Vanessa passed the porridge to the palace maid and wiped the corners of her mouth with a silk handkerchief. The imperial physician said that her mother was suffering from excessive grief, and if she still couldn't eat, she might not be able to hold on. She had been holding on with the few mouthfuls of magic medicine that she had swallowed. "Mother, mother." Vanessa gently hugged the empress and couldn't help but cry. "Your father is too cruel. If he had chosen Sean as the crown prince back then and cut off Josh's hopes, he wouldn't have lost his life for the throne. 2 children and a throne. You're going to make me lose one of my children." The queen spat out a mouthful of blood. The corner of her lips was bright red, and it made her face look even paler. The palace maids cowered and lowered their heads, not daring to speak. "Mother, let me bring you out for a walk. Let's go to Chaos City. Let's go to Mamie's. I'll bring you to eat something delicious. Let's go for a walk." Vanessa picked up a thick coat and draped it over the queen. Then she turned around and instructed, "Go and prepare the flying steed. I'm going to bring Mother to Chaos City tonight." "Princess, it's already late at night, and Her Majesty's body is weak. I'm afraid His Majesty will not allow you to leave the palace at this time," the chief palace maid said hesitantly. The princess was a little capricious, and they couldn't bear the responsibility. "You," Vanessa frowned, but she knew she didn't have the right to do so. "I'm leaving." At this moment, the queen, whose gaze had been wandering, suddenly sat up straight. She looked at the palace maid and said, "Go and report to His Majesty that I'm leaving the palace." "Yes," the palace maid quickly replied and left in a hurry. "Mother." Vanessa looked at her mother, who had suddenly regained some energy and was overjoyed. "Help me change." The queen couldn't hide her fatigue, but her voice was firm. The palace maids quickly got busy. They helped the queen change into thick and warm clothes, and even draped a large fox fur coat over her. That palace maid returned quickly and said that His Majesty had agreed to let the queen and princess leave the palace. The flying steed was already prepared. Vanessa was surprised by her father's wisdom, but she still helped the queen onto a huge flying steed. There was a magnificent palace on its broad back. This was the golden-winged eagle that the king would only ride when he was out. "To Chaos City," Vanessa ordered. 10 odd flying steeds took off and flew towards the moonlit night. They left the city and headed south. After they were 50 kilometers out of the city, the queen, who who had been silent all this while, suddenly said, "Let them turn around and go north." "Go north? Mother, aren't we going to Chaos City?" Vanessa exclaimed. She thought that with her friendship with Mr. Mac, even if they reached Chaos City in the middle of the night, it shouldn't be a problem to ask Mr. Mac to cook a meal for her mother. However, her mother had changed her mind and wanted to go north. "I want to see Josh personally. Otherwise, I won't be able to rest in peace for the rest of my life," the Queen said firmly. "But you want me to go out and give the orders?" The Queen looked at her. Vanessa's heart sank. She turned around and said, "The Queen has ordered us to turn around and head to the extreme north." After the order was given, the flying steeds stopped. There was a small commotion outside, but the flying steeds quickly turned around and flew towards the north. Cinderella really wants to see it personally. At the top of the palace tower, Andre looked at the sky in the north with a complicated expression. In just a few days, his sideburns had turned white, and he looked much older. More than 10 flying mounts slowly landed 5 kilometers away from the Devil's Seal. The guards had already marked their position. Balls of fire lit up on the ice field. There were even level 10 guardians rushing in their direction and surrounding them. "This is the Roth Empire's Queen's Guard. Do not attack," the guard captain shouted. The guards were still looking at them warily, and they didn't put down their weapons. A 10th-tier knight rushed over and was slightly shocked to see the golden-winged condor. He went forward and respectfully said, "Greetings, Queen. May I ask what brings you here in the middle of the night?" This was the Devil's Seal that the allied forces of all races were guarding together. Even if he was an officer of the Roth Empire and the person who came was the Queen, he still had to follow the rules and ask questions. Cinderella was helped out of the palace by Vanessa. She looked at the 10th-tier knight and said, "I'm sorry for the sudden visit tonight. I want to see my son, Josh." The expressions of the various guardians suddenly became unfriendly. Even that 10th-tier knight's expression stiffened. The human knights and magic casters among the guardians also turned their faces away. The Queen's son, Josh, had died on this battlefield. However, his death wasn't something to be proud of. It was exchanged with the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers of the Allied forces. The blood of the soldiers had yet to dry, but the Queen of the Roth Empire came to the front line to pay respects to her son? What a ridiculous and hateful thing. The Guardians only felt a chill in their hearts, and they couldn't hide the anger in their eyes when they looked at Cinderella. Vanessa had never seen such a scene before. She grabbed Cinderella's arm instinctively and was a little scared. The Queen's guards also tightened their defenses and looked at the Guardians around them warily. "I hate devils as much as you all do, but I'm just an ordinary mother now. I just want to take a look at the place where my son was last standing. I just want to take a closer look," Cinderella said, holding back her grief. Chapter 2240. The Alliance Guardians looked at Cinderella. This noble queen looked so sad and weak at the moment. They had lost their comrades and friends, and she had indeed lost her son. The source of all of this came from the devil under the seal formation. The Imperial General stepped to the side and made way for them. The protectors of the Alliance army parted to form a path that led straight to the sealing formation. Thank you. Cinderella bowed deeply to the Guardians with Vanessa's help, and then walked down the steps slowly and weakly. This place was 5 miles away from the core of the seal. Cinderella looked at the black shadow that rose from the ice field in the darkness and walked forward. "Mother!" Vanessa supported her thin body and walked forward on the smooth ice. It was too cold here. Even though she was wearing thick cotton-padded clothes, she could still feel the bone-chilling cold. The cold air that she breathed into her lungs was like an ice blade, not to mention walking on the smooth ice surface. Every step she took was exceptionally difficult. Her mother's body was so weak that she would collapse on the road before she finished the 5-mile journey. "Get a sled for Queen Cinderella," a dragon powerhouse said. Soon, a sled and a group of sled dogs were sent over. Vanessa expressed her gratitude and helped Cinderella onto the sled. She covered her with a thick blanket, and a mage came forward to hold up a thermal magic barrier. Soon, the sled arrived at the towering seal. Cinderella stood up and looked at the dark seal array formation. Tears streamed down her face. After a long while, she looked at the sky and murmured, "Josh, let's go." Your soul should go to a cleaner place. This is the last time I'm here to see you. I will use the rest of my life to repay the sins you have committed." A strange wind suddenly blew on the ice field, and the snow swirled around the seal a few times before dissipating. Cinderella looked at this scene in a daze. Then a smile appeared on her face, and she collapsed in Vanessa's arms. "Royal Doctor! Royal Doctor!" Vanessa exclaimed as she hugged Cinderella. Royal doctors and healing magicians immediately stepped forward. One of them diagnosed the queen, while the other immediately used healing magic to stabilize her condition. "Your Highness, the queen's condition is even worse than before. We can only temporarily stabilize her condition, but if she still refuses to eat, I'm afraid." The imperial physician hesitated, but his meaning was clear. Vanessa's expression changed slightly, but she quickly calmed down and ordered, "Bring Mother back to the palace immediately," and then set off for Chaos City. Then, she jumped off the sled and bowed to the guards again to express her gratitude and apology. She turned around to look at the towering seal and the vast icy plains. Then she got on the sled and left without looking back. After seeing the battle line of the polar ice plains with her own eyes, she suddenly felt less sad, because she felt the difficulties of the Allied soldiers. They had come here to fight against the million undead army in real time, all for the sake of protecting the people behind the mountain range. Joshua chose to become the devil's puppet, and from that moment onwards, he was no longer the second brother that she was familiar with. It was a blessing for the Northern continent that he had died here. It was also a blessing for the billions of citizens of the Roth Empire. The flying steed took off again and flew towards the south. Early the next morning, the sun rose slowly from the horizon, and its light shone on the land. Cinderella, who had slept with a fever for the night, woke up. She walked to the window with Vanessa's help and saw the sun shining on Chaos City, awakening this sleeping city. Looking down at this big city from the sky, the various buildings were exotic, and it was a completely different scenery from Rodu. A smile appeared on Cinderella's pale face, as if she had felt the beauty of life again. Vanessa, who had stayed by the bed without sleeping for the whole night, saw the smile on Cinderella's face and couldn't hide her joy. She coquettishly said, "Mother, we've reached Chaos City. I'll bring you to have Mr. Mac's breakfast. We'll have tofu pudding." "All right." Cinderella looked at her and reached out to touch her face gently. Her heart ached as she said, "I must have scared you these few days. As long as Mother is fine, I'm fine." Vanessa shook her head and hugged Cinderella gently. She sobbed, "Mother, I will be by your side." Cinderella patted her back gently and smiled with relief. After the Queen's team coordinated with Chaos City, the golden-winged condor received permission to enter the city and landed in the Aiden Square. This is the Aiden Square. Amy's is in the southwest corner of the square, Vanessa introduced as she held Cinderella's arm. Cinderella looked around and softly said, "The last time I came here was almost 20 years ago. You weren't even born then." "Mother, you've been to Chaos City before too?" Vanessa was shocked. Cinderella nodded slightly and said, "I've followed your father on many expeditions. Apart from the Twilight Forest, I've been to all the territories on the Northern continent." There was a horse-drawn carriage attached to the palace. Vanessa helped Cinderella into the carriage and went straight to Amy's. The sky was just starting to brighten, and it was only 6 a.m. Amy's wasn't open yet, and there were no customers queuing in front of the door. Vanessa looked at Cinderella, who was leaning weakly against the carriage, and jumped off the carriage. She jogged to the door and rang the bell on the door. She knew Mr. Mac's rules, but her mother hadn't eaten for too long and was so weak that she could faint at any time. The royal doctor said that if she fainted again, she might not be able to wake up again. She still couldn't eat normal food, so her only hope was now on Meg. Vanessa rang the bell for a while, and the restaurant's door finally opened. "Vanessa!" Meg looked at Vanessa, who was standing at the door, in shock. After not seeing her for a while, Vanessa looked much thinner. Her eyes were red and swollen, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She couldn't hide her fatigue, and looked like she hadn't rested well for a long time. She was no longer the heartless glutton she used to be. "Mr. Mac, please, can you make breakfast for my mother?" She hasn't eaten for 3 days and 3 nights. The royal doctor said that if she doesn't eat soon, her life might be in danger. Vanessa went up and grabbed Meg's arm, as if she was clutching at a life-saving straw. Meg looked at the luxurious horse-drawn carriage behind them. Judging from Vanessa's words, the Queen of the Roth Empire should be sitting inside. In the square further back, a golden condor was shining brightly. Vanessa came all the way from Rodu with the Queen so early in the morning just to ask for breakfast. Although he didn't know what was going on, Meg still nodded and said, "Come in first." Chapter 22:41. Meg was also a little surprised when he saw Vanessa and the palace maids helping Cinderella out of the carriage. In his memory, the Queen had always been dignified and elegant. She spoke softly and slowly, and she was gentle and kind. However, she now looked pale and skinny, and there were still some silver strands in her hair. It was as if she had aged more than 10 years in an instant. Meg had already thought of the reason. It seemed that Josh's death had brought her great sorrow. No matter what kind of demon he was in the eyes of the world, in her heart, he was still the child that she had given birth to and raised painstakingly. Meg couldn't develop any feelings of disgust towards such a mother. Instead, he thought about how he had fallen into the water and died. He wondered if that cold woman would be sad too. Meg stepped aside and watched as Vanessa and the palace maids helped Vanessa into the room and sat down. The heater was on in the dining room, and the temperature was very comfortable. Vanessa helped Cinderella untie the fox fur coat and draped it over the chair so that she could lean comfortably against the back of the chair. "What do you want to eat?" Meg poured 2 cups of warm water for the mother and daughter and added 2 drops of life water. "Thank you." Cinderella nodded slightly at Meg. She held the crystal cup with her cold hands and felt the warmth. She picked up the cup and took a sip of the water. The sweet life water touched her chapped lips and nourished her gently. The faint fragrance slid down her throat, and it was as if the dry earth had suddenly been nourished by a spring. She couldn't help but relax her eyebrows. Life water wasn't considered a precious item in the royal family, but after slowly drinking a cup of water, Cinderella felt that she was alive again. She felt the hunger, the weakness of her body, and the desire for food. "Mother, what would you like to eat?" Vanessa pushed the menu in front of Cinderella. She also scanned the menu and couldn't help but swallow when she saw the new dishes. "Give me some," Cinderella said with a smile. Vanessa looked at it for a while and said, "Then I'll order you a congee with pork and century egg, 2 soup dumplings, and a cup of soy milk." The soup dumplings are a new product. I haven't eaten them before, but they look good. "All right," Cinderella nodded. Meg looked at Vanessa closing the menu and couldn't help but smile. "What about you? What are you eating?" "Me?" Vanessa was surprised. She shook her head and said, "It's not business hours now. I can't trouble Mr. Mac to cook for me. It's already very good of you to cook for my mother. Let's try the shaved noodles. It's a new dish that was released the day before yesterday. Also, give me 2 soup dumplings." Meg turned around and walked into the kitchen with a smile, not giving Vanessa a chance to refuse. This girl's eyes were green with envy when she looked at the menu, but she still resisted the urge to eat. "This Mr. Meg is really a good person." Cinderella looked at Meg's back and smiled gently. However, when she saw him pick up the kitchen knife, she was slightly stunned. She seemed to feel that his side profile was a little familiar, but she couldn't remember who he looked like. "Yes, Mr. Mac is a super good person. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be able to eat now." Vanessa nodded and looked at Meg in the kitchen with her chin in her hand. Her eyes were filled with the dough that was constantly changing forms in his hands. The dough was distributed in advance last night, but the soup dumplings and shaved noodles had to be made on the spot. Fortunately, the congee with pork and century egg for the cleaners was cooking in the pot, and it was just right. He scooped a bowl for Queen Cinderella and brought it out to let her fill her stomach first. The congee with pork and century egg that had just come out of the pot was steaming hot. There were a few green onions scattered on the surface, and the fragrance of the meat was already wafting over. Cinderella, who hadn't eaten for a few days, smelled the fragrance of the meat, and her stomach was already growling uncontrollably. Her eyes were fixed on the congee in front of her. Bits of lean meat were hidden in the snow-white congee, and there were pieces of century egg that had an amber-like texture. The green onions made the congee even brighter. "It's a little hot. Mother, be careful." Vanessa took the spoon and put it in the bowl as she softly reminded her. "Okay." Sindra found it a little funny. When she was young, she always reminded the little one to be careful of the heat. Now, it was the other way around, and she felt warm in her heart. She scooped up a spoonful of congee with the spoon, blew on it gently, and put it into her mouth. The warm congee melted in her mouth. It was sticky, but the texture was exceptionally smooth. The shredded meat was also soft. When she bit into it gently, the fragrance of the meat wantonly in her mouth. It was fresh and delicious. After swallowing it, she felt a warm current slide down her throat into her stomach slowly. Her stomach that had been tortured by hunger for many days warmed up, and she felt comfortable all over. The century egg was slightly springy and had a special fragrance, giving this bowl of congee a deeper taste. Her original resistance to food was completely defeated in this mouthful of congee. "The queen is eating." The palace maid at the side covered her mouth in surprise. One had to know that the palace chefs had been racking their brains to make all kinds of food for the queen these past few days, but she didn't even eat a single bite. She didn't expect that she would eat a simple bowl of congee now. Mother really knows how to eat the food made by Mr. Mac. Vanessa was also overjoyed and excited. Fortunately, she wasn't desperate. Otherwise, she wouldn't know how to explain it to her father. Sindra ate one mouthful after another, and in a short while, the entire bowl of congee with pork and century egg was gone. She was stunned when she saw the bottom of the bowl of congee. Only then did she realize that she had been wolfing down the food just now, and couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Fortunately, there was no one else in the dining hall. Meg was also busy in the kitchen, and probably didn't see it. "Is it good?" Vanessa asked with a smile as she wiped the corner of her mouth with a silk handkerchief. "It's the most delicious congee I've ever eaten." Sindra nodded with a smile. After this bowl of congee, Sindra felt that she had recovered a lot of her strength, and her spirit became more active. The haze in her heart was swept away, and she seemed to feel that life had become more hopeful. If the rising sun in the morning gave her the courage to start afresh, then this bowl of congee made her feel the beauty of life again. The warmth warmed her heart, and the delicious taste brought her a long-lost happiness. This is soup dumplings. There's a simple introduction on the menu. The soup inside is very hot, so be careful when you eat it. Meg came out with 2 baskets of soup dumplings. There were 3 in each basket, and he placed them in front of Sindra and Vanessa. "Thank you, Mr. Mac." Vanessa blinked at him gratefully. Meg just smiled and turned to go back into the kitchen. He was the one who killed Josh, but with the addition of new and old grudges, and with the addition of getting rid of evil for the people, Meg didn't feel guilty at all. This breakfast was for Vanessa, and it had nothing to do with Josh. Chapter 2242. The congee with pork and century egg was the appetizer. Seeing the white, tender, and bulging soup dumplings, Sindra looked forward to it even more. It looked so bouncy. Vanessa poked the soup dumpling gently with a finger. The soup dumpling trembled slightly and swayed gently. It was soft to the touch, but it didn't lose its tenacity. How am I supposed to eat such a thin skin wrapped in such a rich soup? Sindra looked at the soup dumpling that looked like it was going to explode at any time and was a little troubled. "Let me see." Vanessa flipped open the menu and quickly found the section for soup dumplings. There was indeed a row of "How to Eat" written in small font at the bottom. Use your chopsticks to gently pick up the small lump on the top of the soup dumpling and transfer it to your shallow soup bowl. Then, use your mouth to gently bite a hole diagonally above it. After the soup has warmed up, take a small sip of the soup before eating the thin skin and meat filling. As Vanessa recited, she learned how to pick up a soup dumpling. The round soup dumpling was elongated and looked like it was going to explode at any moment. However, it was still tenacious, and she successfully transferred it to the shallow bowl in front of her. "It's a success!" Vanessa exclaimed in surprise as she heaved a sigh of relief. She didn't expect the thin, translucent skin to be so tenacious. Sindra found it interesting. She also picked up her chopsticks and carefully picked up a soup dumpling to put it in her bowl. She was afraid that it would break or fall on the table, and that made her clench her other fist nervously. The two of them stared at each other for a while. Cinderella, who was salivating, couldn't help but touch the skin of the soup dumpling. It was warm to the touch, and she said, "I think it's done." As she said that, she bent down and took a small bite on the soup dumpling. The rich soup immediately gushed out from her small mouth. It's hot." The soup dumpling had just come out of the oven. Although the thin and tenacious skin had warmed up slightly, the soup inside was still hot. She opened her mouth and took a bite, and the delicious soup gushed into her mouth. The fragrance of the crab roe was intoxicating, and the soup was so delicious that it instantly disarmed her taste buds and made her unable to stop herself. As for the burning sensation, before it could ferment, it was completely suppressed by the delicious taste. After a while, the soup was almost finished. She picked up the remaining skin and meat filling and took a bite. The dough was chewy, and the meat dumpling that was soaked in juice was neither greasy nor fat. It was smooth in the mouth, and together with the taste of the crab meat and crab roe, it really made Cinderella's eyebrows relax. If the congee with pork and century egg was an appetizer, then the soup dumplings, which were full of meat and extremely delicious, allowed her to experience the beauty of food and the joy of living. That's right. Only by being alive would one be able to experience such magical food. Not only could they taste the delicious meat broth, they could also taste the flexibility of the pastries, and they could also taste the meat. It was just a small soup dumpling. How much ingenuity did the chef put into it to bring such a unique experience to the customers? She really found it interesting. She even had a desire to find out for herself how the soup dumplings were made and how the thick meaty aroma was infused into the thin dough. With her status, she had never been to a kitchen in her life, let alone cook for herself. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but shake her head with a smile. "Wow, this is too delicious. Mr. Mac actually secretly made such a delicious breakfast behind my back." Vanessa, who was sitting opposite her, also ate a soup dumpling. Her mouth was glistening with oil as she exclaimed excitedly. A basket of delicious soup dumplings brought surprise and hope to the tired and sad mother and daughter. It even made them forget their sadness temporarily. After all, there were so many beautiful things in life, right? They sipped the soup and chewed the meat filling and the skin of the dumplings, savoring the delicacies that they couldn't even eat in the Rhoda Palace. Gulp! The palace maid at the side swallowed her saliva and tried her best to look away. As the queen's personal palace maid, she had received professional training. Even if she was faced with exotic delicacies, she would definitely not be greedy. But today, seeing the queen and the princess eating the soup dumplings and smelling the fragrance of crab roe and meat, her defenses were easily broken. What kind of divine smell is this? Even the various delicacies that the royal chefs in the palace sent to the harem every day had never brought such a shock to her. Of course, the more important thing was the feeling of curiosity. What exactly did the soup dumplings with such a magical fragrance taste like? What was the difference between the soup wrapped in the skin and ordinary meat soup? Vanessa bit open the third soup dumpling and leaned over to take a small sip. When she looked up, she happened to see Meg holding a bowl of dough in the kitchen and holding a kitchen knife in one hand as he shaved the dough. The dough flew out of the dough and jumped into the boiling soup like silver fish. As he swung the knife, it almost became a line. Vanessa didn't want to let go of the dumpling in her mouth, but she still reached out her finger to signal Cinderella to look in the direction of the kitchen. Cinderella turned around and looked with a hint of surprise in her eyes. Meg was shaving the noodles. This scene looked like an artistic performance. His movements were skillful and natural. His expression was calm, but his eyes were bright. After a while, the last piece of dough jumped into the pot. He put away the knife, put down the dough, and picked up the spoon to get busy again. Soon, Meg walked out of the kitchen with a bowl of braised beef noodles and placed it in front of Vanessa. Pieces of beef covered the entire bowl of noodles. At a glance, there was a sense of satisfaction. "Mr. Mac, did you add meat especially for me?" Vanessa looked up at Meg and asked with sparkling eyes. "No, every customer is like this." Meg shook his head. You don't even know how to make a girl happy." Vanessa pursed her lips. He was indeed a man of steel. "But I added an egg for the record," Meg said with a smile and turned to enter the kitchen. Vanessa used her chopsticks to move the beef aside. As expected, a fried golden egg was revealed. A sweet smile appeared on her face. She took a small bowl and filled it with a bowl of noodles for Cinderella. She scooped 2 spoonfuls of braised beef into a mini bowl of noodles. "I'm already full." Cinderella was about to say something when Vanessa fed her a piece of braised beef. The soft braised meat almost melted in her mouth, but it didn't lose its chewiness. The mellowness of the beef had been completely activated by the seasoning. The more she chewed, the more fragrant it became. It formed a lingering aftertaste that was intoxicating. "I think I can eat a little more." Cinderella took the bowl and picked up a piece of noodles. The noodles were as white as snow and were much wider than the usual noodles. They weren't even squares, but were shaped like willow leaves. The sides were slightly thinner, and the middle was slightly thicker. The edges were distinct. Chapter 22:43. The noodles entered her mouth, and they were soft and smooth without losing their chewiness. They were soaked in the bone broth, and every bite was very fragrant. Cinderella raised her eyebrows in amazement. It was completely different from the noodles she usually ate. After finishing the beef and noodles, she had a mouthful of broth. This broth was bone broth, and it was as white as milk. It was obvious that it had been simmered for a long time. It was so fragrant that she couldn't bear to leave any broth behind after finishing the noodles. She finished the small bowl of knife-shaved noodles with a slurp. This time, Cinderella really felt full. She hadn't eaten for 3 days, but she didn't feel uncomfortable even though she had eaten quite a lot. Instead, she felt refreshed, and her body was warm and comfortable. She leaned back comfortably in the chair with a smile on her rosy face as she looked at Vanessa, who was eating seriously with her head lowered. As a lady, she didn't look elegant when she was eating, but she found it adorable. As long as she was happy, it didn't seem that important to her to be elegant. Vanessa picked up a fried egg and took a bite. The soft egg was soaked in the broth and had a hint of beef aroma. The crispiness of the egg itself was even more alluring. Vanessa looked up at Cinderella and swallowed the egg in her mouth as she asked, "Mother, do you want some more? I'm already full. I can't even finish the soy milk that hasn't been served yet." Cinderella shook her head with a smile. She had a small appetite to begin with. She was already surprised that she could eat so much in the morning. Vanessa smiled and nodded. "Then I'll bring you out to play after we're done. There are many fun places in Chaos City. You definitely didn't see them when you came with Royal Father the last time." "All right." Cinderella nodded. After finishing this bowl of knife-shaved noodles and the 3 soup dumplings from before, Vanessa's fatigue was swept away. She was full of energy again. Vanessa got up and skipped to the kitchen door. She looked at Meg, who was making the tofu pudding, and said, "Mr. Mac, I'll get the bill. This meal is on me." Meg turned around and said with a smile, "No, you've made such a sumptuous breakfast for us so early in the morning, which has completely increased your burden. How can we let you get free food?" Vanessa looked at the tofu pudding in front of Meg and swallowed her saliva. She took out her money pouch and placed a handful of dragon coins on the counter. "Thank you." Vanessa bowed to Meg again and winked at him playfully. "Then I won't disturb you any longer. I'm going to take my mother out to play." "Thank you, mister." Cinderella also stood up and thanked Meg. When she saw Chaos City today, she was already determined to live again. But after having breakfast at Amy's, she made up her mind. This time, she was going to change her way of living. "You're too kind." Meg nodded slightly. To him, it was just making breakfast for a friend in advance. It was nothing. After watching the two of them leave, Meg casually put half of the dragon coins on the counter into his pocket. Before he could put the other half into the money box, Irina's voice sounded from the stairs. "Yo, we haven't even opened yet, and business is already here." Irina, who was wearing a thin nightgown, walked down the stairs with a smile. Her lithe figure was faintly discernible under the thin nightgown. She walked up to Meg and wrapped her arms around his neck gently. She moved closer to his ear and whispered, "Is it enough? If it's not enough, you can get more." A faint fragrance wafted into his nose, and her voice was even more pleasant. However, the words that came out of her mouth made Meg's expression stiffen. It should be enough to buy groceries today. Meg nodded naturally and took out a money bag marked with grocery money from his pocket. Why don't you count it? Irina looked at the money bag with a playful look. She drew circles on his chest with her finger and chuckled. You've really done a lot for this family. In order to let you and your mother live a good life, it's what I should do, Meg said with a righteous look. Irina burst into laughter. She let go of Meg's hand and sat down on a chair at the side. She smiled and said, Why did Vanessa bring Cinderella here? Meg looked at the beautiful smile on her face. His heart was moved. He was the only one who could appreciate such charm. After all, in the eyes of outsiders, Irina was an unattainable princess of the elves and a terrifying 10th-tier magic caster. However, in front of him, she was more like a woman. She had no burdens and could flirt, joke, and occasionally scold. She had a fiery temperament, but she was also more adorable and interesting. To heal, Meg said. To heal? Irina's expression was a little strange. If she knows that Josh died at our hands, I wonder if she'll vomit blood. To be precise, Josh died at the hands of demons. It has nothing to do with us. The one we killed was just a shell that had completely lost its soul. Meg shook his head and sighed. He got off too easy. It's not that cheap. He was a proud and arrogant fellow who set the world as his goal. In the end, he had his soul devoured. I think he must have been in great despair before he died, Irina said with a smile. She had no sympathy for the guy who had almost killed Meg and Amy and forced their family into a desperate situation. This favor was given to Vanessa, and that girl is very sensible. She gave me a lot. Meg looked at Irina with a smile. What do you want to eat for breakfast? I want to eat you. Irina stared at him and said with her chin raised. Meg raised his hand to look at his watch and shook his head. There's not enough time. Sometimes it was a difficult thing to endure for too long. Then I'll have a bowl of shaved noodles. Irina leaned lazily against the back of the chair and looked at Meg, who had turned to go into the kitchen. She said, What identity do you think I should use to enter Amy's? I saw the way those girls look at you. They can't wait to eat you alive. If you beckon them with your finger, I'm afraid they'll wash themselves clean and send themselves to your door. This is not good. I think it's time to change it. I think it's pretty good. Who wouldn't be happy about being liked? Mag righteously said, I'm Boss Mag, who's always calm and collected. Not just anyone can seduce me. Is that so? Irina's lips curled up. I think your previous beast-eared girl was not bad. I don't like that anymore. She's too obedient. She doesn't look like a lady boss. Irina shook her head. Then why don't we do a scene where Amy cleaves the mountain to save her mother? Meg asked again. Irina was a little interested. She sat up slightly and said, What's that? You'll act as a monkey trapped under the Five Fingers Mountain. Oh no, I mean an elf. You'll be forced to be separated from us. After Amy learns magic, she'll go to the sealed land alone and cleave the mountain to save her mother. It'll be a good story. What about you? Me? I'm just a freeloader. I'll just focus on my job. Well, it sounds good, but where's the Five Fingers Mountain? How about Mount Hua? Where's Mount Hua? What kind of mountain is there in the Wind Forest? The Wind Forest is a plain with only a few slopes. It doesn't deserve to be called a mountain. Chapter 2244. After some serious discussion, Meg and Irina still couldn't come to a consensus on her new identity, so they could only give up for now. Meg was actually looking forward to her appearing as Mamie's lady boss. After all, their interactions now were more or less sneaky. Making an official appearance as the mother of two children should be something she yearned for. Actually, even if you announce your identity directly, no one would dare to do anything to you now, right? Irina said vaguely as she ate her noodles. Meg was stunned. With his current power and reputation, that was indeed the case. A demigod was already an invincible existence on the Norland continent, and he had played an important role twice in the war against the devils. He had already become the savior in many people's hearts, and was no longer just the unparalleled god of war of the Roth Empire. Even if he were to announce his identity now, no one would dare to come looking for death. Josh was dead. Sean's arm was broken. and the wind forest was completely destroyed. Who else was there? Without waiting for Meg to answer, Irina muttered to herself, but if that's the case, it seems like it will become very boring. Those customers will no longer come purely for the food and cook for a group of people with ulterior motives. Boring. Yes, boring. This was also one of the reasons why Meg didn't want to announce his identity. There was another deeper reason. Perhaps it was that little bit of persistence in his heart. The boss of Mamie's, Meg, might be the real him, and also the identity he liked and accepted wholeheartedly. And the savior, Alex, was more like another character that Spider-Man put on a mask to play. He could just appear when needed. He couldn't imagine how his originally interesting life would be torn apart if he were to announce his identity. A large number of customers might be replaced. The patience of those people with ulterior motives wasn't something that could be compared to those who purely ate. The ladies in the restaurant might also feel uncomfortable when interacting with him and become restrained and unnatural. Meg felt terrible just by thinking about it. Irina picked up the bowl and drank the noodle soup. Then, she looked at Meg and said, "Oh yes. Isn't your Miss Black Cat printed? Are you planning to sell it in the restaurant too?" "No, Miss Black Cat is planning to use it to advertise for team leader Vicky. If it sells well in Chaos City, it won't bring her much profit, so I'm planning to send these 10,000 copies to Rodu and get Effie to help me sell them." Meg poured a cup of warm water for her. Irina took a sip of water and looked at him with a smile. "You look more like a shrewd businessman now. It's money. It's not shabby at all." Meg smiled. He looked at her and said, "Only when one is in charge will one know that firewood and rice are expensive. Money is a good thing. You should understand this very well. 40,000 elves. One mouthful of rice per person. That's not a small number." Irina nodded in agreement. After all, this was not the wind forest. The elves could not be self-sufficient and had to spend money to buy everything. If it weren't for the fact that Meg immediately got a few big projects for the Night Elves when they came to Chaos City, and they were all very profitable projects, she would have to worry about the Night Elves' meals every day. "Then I'll get them to arrange for people to send these picture books to the Titan Tavern today? That's good too. I'll write a letter to Effie later and ask her to help me sell the picture books." Meg nodded. That would save him a trip. Apart from asking her to sell the picture books, Meg also gave Effie a gift. Rum agency. Hannah's distillery had officially entered the era of mass production. Apart from supplying Amy's, they also had a very sufficient supply. Meg's plan was to set up 3 rum outlets in Chaos City and expand outside at the same time. Rodu, which was popular with alcohol culture and had a huge consumption potential, was naturally one of his targets for expansion. Effie was a good business partner, so he intended to give this opportunity to her. Apart from Titan Tavern, there was no other alcohol that could support the Titan Tavern's reputation. If they could get rum as a supplement, they would naturally be more competitive. It was a business, so it was only right for them to take care of each other. After the morning operating hours, Meg went to Hope School. It only took a few months for the new school to be built from the ground up in the northern part of the city. The craftsmen were removing the outer fences. There were rows upon rows of 4-story teaching buildings. There was a training field, a magic hall, a vocational building, everything that one could think of. Meg stood at the school's entrance with a slight smirk. He seemed to have already seen the children carrying their school bags and entering the new school. He was involved in the whole process of this school, from the acquisition of funds to the location and design of the blueprints. Although he didn't come often, he could be said to have watched it being built bit by bit. The establishment of Hope School was to give those children who dropped out of school due to poverty a chance to receive an education, and to give them a chance to change their fate through learning. He always believed that learning was the most effective way for most people to change their fate and social class. The theory that learning was useful was still applicable even in a different world. Because he had seen Amy's group of friends, he was even more enthusiastic about promoting this matter and gave a lot of support. The finishing work of the school was almost done, and it looked like it wouldn't be a problem to start school in a week. "Mr. Meg?" A voice came from behind him. Meg turned around and smiled at the person who came. "Teacher Luna, what a coincidence. The new teachers have a trial class today, so I came to take a look and also hand over the construction team." Luna stood in front of Meg and smiled at him. "This is your first time coming here after the school was built, right?" Do you want me to show you around? If Teacher Luna isn't busy, of course, I'd be honored. Meg smiled and nodded. He originally wanted to see the school's construction, so it was naturally better to have Luna show him around. This way, please. Luna led Meg through the school gate. As the principal of Hope School, every blade of grass and every tree here was her painstaking effort. Listening to Luna explain the situation of Hope School in detail, Meg nodded from time to time and asked questions occasionally, looking at her with more admiration. He originally thought that as long as the money was in place, everything would be easy. But to actually build a school, establish a teaching team, and enroll students and assign classes was actually such a tedious and difficult task. Luna was a weak woman, but she shouldered all of this alone. In order to build a school for the children that could change their fate, she had sacrificed too much. Luna stood in front of a teaching building and looked at Meg with a smile. Although I've thanked you many times, I still want to thank you on behalf of the children. You're welcome. Meg shook his head and looked at the vocational building in the distance. He smiled and said, "Is your school hiring chef teachers? The kind that doesn't cost money?" Chapter 22:45. Luna was stunned. She looked at Meg in a daze. I just heard you say that the school has set up all kinds of vocational training so that the children can master a skill before they enter society. I thought that being a chef is also a profession, so I just asked casually. Meg smiled. Of course, if you don't have such plans for now, just pretend I didn't say anything. Of course, Luna blurted out. Then she embarrassedly said, "But Mr. Meg is so busy. Would it be too much trouble for you to come to the school for lessons?" Mr. Meg's culinary skills were beyond doubt. He was the best chef in Chaos City, or even the Northern Continent. If there was such an excellent chef teaching the children, it would definitely be a great benefit for those children who wanted to be a chef but didn't have the chance. Ding! Host has triggered a side mission. Good teacher. Host, please become a specially hired teacher of Hope School and recruit 30 students for each class. Mission reward. It depends on the host's mission completion rate. The better the culinary skills of the students, the better the reward. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. Meg's eyes lit up. This is interesting. It's all right. Other than the operating hours, I still have time to come for 2 or 3 lessons a week. Meg smiled. I just don't know if I'm suitable to be a teacher, since I've never taught children before. You're a very outstanding and easygoing person. Of course, there's no problem for you to be a teacher. Luna nodded. Also, for the vocational curriculum, our initial arrangement is 3 lessons a week. We can arrange the lessons according to your schedule, Mr. Meg. All right. Meg nodded. After thinking for a while, he asked, "Do I need to take the teacher's entrance exam?" You're a specially hired teacher with professional skills. Everyone knows about your professionalism. But, according to the rules, you have to take a simple test. We need to understand you well and determine if you need to go through some pre-job training, Luna said. Meg nodded. He didn't find it troublesome. Instead, he felt that Luna was very professional. She didn't make him take up the post just because they were close. What's the test about? When will you participate? Meg asked. Professional skills teachers test professional skills and teaching ability. In the chef profession, you can think of it as the process of teaching a student how to cook a dish. It just so happens that there are teachers taking part in the test today. Do you have any other arrangements in the morning? The test will take about an hour, Gina said. Meg nodded thoughtfully and said, "Then let's do the test this morning." He was also a professional when it came to teaching people how to cook. This Goldfinger wasn't given to him for nothing. All right, please follow me. Luna led Meg to the training field. The tests for the teachers of the professions were carried out in these 3 days. Weaponsmiths, healers, pharmacists, professionals from all walks of life were being tested in separate practice fields. Even though Hope School was more of a charity school, Luna listened to Meg's suggestion in terms of salary in order to recruit talents, and offered a very attractive offer. Those who were able to participate in the test today had all passed the written test. There were quite a number of them. Meg listened to Luna's introduction and nodded slightly. Although time was tight, everything in the school was carried out in an orderly manner. Luna's ability was evident. Principal, a young female teacher, stood up in surprise when she saw Luna. Then, she sized up Meg, who was beside her. young, handsome, and steady. Luna stopped that teacher and said, "Hilla, this is Mr. Meg. He plans to apply for a job as a teacher. I brought him here to take part in the test. Please arrange for it to be carried out as soon as possible." Mr. Meg. Hilla felt that the name was familiar. She picked up the name list on the table and scanned it twice. She looked up and said, "But this name isn't on the test list?" Meg looked at her, and the corner of his mouth twitched. It seemed that this person had not eaten at Mamie's yet. But thinking about it, he was not a big star. He was just a restaurant owner with a little fame. He could not just go anywhere and announce his name and shock everyone. Of course, if he changed his name to Alex, the effect would be different. Hilla looked at Luna with mixed feelings. Could it be that the principal wanted to use her connections to add another person? One had to know that those who participated in the test today had all passed the written test before they got the chance to take the test. Luna's great image in her heart began to waver. This Mr. Meg is specially invited by me. According to the rules, he can take the test directly. You can add his name at the end of the list. He is applying for a job as a chef teacher, Luna explained. Oh, okay. Hilla sat down and wrote Meg's name at the end of the list. But she still felt a little uneasy. "Oh yes, Principal, there are no candidates taking the test today, so we did not prepare any kitchenware. If this gentleman wants to take the test, I'm afraid he will have to wait for us to prepare first." Hilla put down her pen and looked at Luna. Luna looked troubled when she heard this. She had forgotten to consider this. "It's okay. I have spare kitchenware. You should have a staff cafeteria here, right? I need you to prepare a few ingredients for me," Meg said. Luna looked at Hilla and said, "Then let's arrange it this way. In the next round, let Mr. Meg take the test first. Can I borrow a pen and paper?" Meg looked at Hilla and said. Hilla opened a book and passed the pen and paper to Meg. Meg took the pen and wrote down the names of a few ingredients. 1 purple eggplant. Hilla looked at the strong and powerful words and was a little surprised. This gentleman looked handsome and elegant. He had a good temperament and could write so well. He was actually a chef. No matter how she looked at him, he looked more like a calligraphy master. His handwriting was so good that it was much better than the handwriting of those who had just come to apply for the calligraphy teacher position. However, he was actually here to cook. Moreover, he had a good temperament. His side profile was perfect, his nose was high, his eyes were deep, and his clothes were decent. He was simply a super high-quality young man. "Hilla?" Luna reminded her. Hilla came back to her senses and quickly looked away from Meg's face. Her face was flushed red as she picked up the book and said, "I'll arrange it now." After saying that, she ran out of the door as if she was escaping. Hilla is a new teacher, but she's a very patient and motivated girl. Luna looked at Hilla's back and smiled. She is very motivated. Meg nodded and followed Luna to the test venue. Chapter 2246. The establishment of the vocational skills course was to allow children from poor families to learn a skill in school and gain a foothold in society. However, it was not easy to recruit teachers in this field. They had to have a popular occupation and be suitable for teaching in school. The test this morning went on for more than an hour. The teachers who acted as judges looked a little serious. A white-haired old teacher nodded at the middle-aged man who had finished his jewelry appreciation demonstration on the stage and said, "Thank you for your teaching. 3 days later, we will post the list of candidates at the school gate." The middle-aged man put away his small wooden box, nodded at the crowd, and turned to leave the testing room. This person's professionalism is not bad, but his teaching ability needs to be improved. The content was too obscure and difficult to understand. Even people like me who know about jewelry found it difficult to understand. I'm afraid the children will find it even harder to accept. A young and beautiful female teacher sighed, the emerald in her hand shining brightly. Yes, many of the teachers who came for the trial this morning have this problem. There is no problem with their professionalism. Those who can pass the test are all senior practitioners in their respective businesses. However, there is a huge difference between their professional work and teaching. Even if they have prepared, their performance is very average. Many of them can't even reach the goal of teaching. The old teacher also sighed. The other judges also had similar worried expressions. It was likely that the situation in the other testing rooms was similar. There was a lack of quality teachers, and this was only because Hope Primary School had offered a very good salary that it could attract so many outstanding talents to come. It was also because of such a good salary that they wanted to choose better teachers for the children so that they could learn useful knowledge and skills in the limited teaching time. Knock, knock. There was a knock on the door. The old teacher picked up the list and looked at it, saying, "Next is a makeup artist." This is a new profession in recent years. The market prospects are good. It is gradually being valued in banquets, performances, and other settings. The door was pushed open, and Luna came in. "Principal." The judges were a little surprised. "Teachers, thank you for your hard work." Luna nodded slightly and introduced to the crowd. "This is Mr. Meg, who I specially invited. He is a chef. Because he is tight on time, I brought him here to take the test first." Hearing this, everyone's eyes fell on Meg, who had followed Luna in. Meg, who was wearing a long gray windbreaker, had a tall figure. He wore a pair of black leather boots under his black suit pants. He was handsome, and his facial features were upright. There was a slight smile at the corner of his mouth, and he looked quite amiable. Other than his handsomeness, he did seem to fit the disposition of a teacher. The eyes of the two ladies present lit up slightly. Among the people who came to take the test this morning, there was no doubt that this person's appearance and figure ranked first. It wasn't that he had other intentions. He just wanted to make his eyes more comfortable so that he could work more efficiently. "Mr. Meg? Why does this name sound so familiar?" The teacher, wearing the emerald, frowned as he searched his memory. Mary had just returned from Rodu recently. Previously, she had been in charge of the family's affairs in Rodu, but because she was tired of the internal strife in the family, she handed over all the affairs to the other members of the family last month and returned to Rodu. It just so happened that Hope School was recruiting teachers. After hearing about teacher Luna's story, she went into seclusion at home to study for a month. She successfully passed the written examination and interview and became the new teacher of Chaos School. Because there was a shortage of staff, she, as a new teacher, was also pulled in as a judge. "Chef? Principal, when we were discussing this, we didn't set up a chef major, right?" The old teacher, Elton, asked Luna. The other four teachers were also looking at Luna. Although the principal had the right to invite talents, the establishment of a chef training class was indeed not part of their plan. Furthermore, they had discussed this profession before. In order to become an outstanding chef, the students had to have a good teacher and undergo a lot of practice. Regardless of whether it was the student's schedule, the venue, or the consumption of various ingredients, they were all things that Hope School couldn't provide very well at the moment. For example, professions such as jewelry appreciation and sales had very low requirements for the venue. They were more suitable for the current Chaos School. Luna knew what all of the teachers were thinking. In the past, she had indeed not planned to set up a chef major. However, this was a suggestion from Mr. Meg. As someone who had tasted Mr. Meg's cooking many times, she knew that if the children could learn from him, even if they only learned one or two of his signature dishes, they would be able to live comfortably. In fact, they might even become the target of all restaurants. This was a true master chef, and he was willing to teach the children for free. She had no doubt that Meg would teach the children with the most sincere attitude. However, according to the rules of the test, the judges were randomly assigned, and the details of the testers were not to be revealed during the test. She could only say, being a chef is a profession with a lot of job prospects. After you complete your studies, you will be able to find a job regardless of whether you are running a restaurant on your own or joining a restaurant's kitchen. After careful consideration, I've decided to set up a chef major and hire professional chefs to teach and train the children. This was ridiculous. Alton's brows furrowed, but he repressed the urge to say anything. He was a retired teacher, and it was Luna who had personally invited him here. He was very attached to Hope School, but there were so many teachers present, so he couldn't turn down Luna. All of the other teachers also didn't say anything. Hope School had been established by Luna, and she was the principal, so she had the right to make all of the decisions. However, everyone was still rather perplexed by her decision to set up a chef major right before the start of the school term. Could it be because of this man? But he was dressed so elegantly, and his aura was that of a nobleman's. Was he really a chef? Alton turned to Meg and said, "That being said, we didn't prepare any of the items required for the chef's test today. We don't even have basic cooking utensils. Are you planning to perform without any actual food?" Meg could already sense some doubts and dissatisfaction from the teacher's expressions and words. It seemed that his sudden request had caused some trouble for Luna. "I apologize for my abrupt visit, but I've brought my cooking utensils, and I've already asked Teacher Hilla to help me find the ingredients I need in the cafeteria. They should be here soon," Meg said with a smile as he pulled out a set of cooking utensils from a storage box. Chapter 2247. All of the teachers wore peculiar expressions as they looked at the testing room that was suddenly filled with all kinds of kitchenware. They weren't too surprised that Meg had a storage device. Although it was precious, it was still something that could be easily obtained as long as one had enough money. However, to come to the testing room with such a complete set of kitchenware, they were all stunned speechless. Maylie looked at Meg with her beautiful eyes, and an intrigued smile appeared on her face. This man was quite interesting. She wanted to see how he was going to conduct a cooking lesson in his proper attire. "Here are the things you wanted, but I didn't find any chili or garlic," Hilla said to Meg as she walked in with a basket. Meg accepted the basket and smiled at Hilla. "Thank you, I brought these 2 ingredients myself." Hilla looked at Meg's warm smile and blushed slightly. She nodded and said, It's all right, it's just a small matter." After saying that, she bid farewell to Luna and all of the teachers and quickly left, closing the door behind her. Luna walked to the judge's table and sat down. Meg took out the chili and garlic from the storage device and said to Eldon, "I'm ready. We can begin the test." "Are you sure you're ready?" Eldon asked as he looked at Meg, who was wearing a trench coat. "Yes." Meg nodded. "Then let's begin." Eldon nodded. Things had already progressed to this stage, so it would be unreasonable for him to try and stop him. He wanted to see what kind of skills this man had that could make Luna change her mind. He wanted to see if the Hope School really wanted to add a cooking major to him. "Everyone as a chef, the first lesson I'm going to teach you is to dress appropriately. People who dress like me don't deserve to be in the kitchen." Meg switched to teacher mode in a second. He took off his windbreaker and placed it on the table beside him. He unbuttoned his suit one by one and placed it on the table as well. Only a white shirt was left. The well-tailored shirt revealed the outline of his 8-pack abs. A chef's battlefield is in the kitchen. Our weapons are kitchen knives and spoons, and a decent chef's uniform is our battle robe. Obviously, my uniform is not up to standard. However, due to the limited conditions today, I can't change my clothes. But we have to be as careful as possible. Meg carefully rolled up the sleeves of his shirt, then put on the apron and the chef's hat. Cleanliness is the most important thing when serving food to guests. Therefore, we have to eliminate any contamination that we might bring to the food, such as the dirt on our hair and clothes. Meg poured a basin of water and said while washing, after changing into the chef's uniform, "The first step is to wash your hands. A pair of clean hands is the most basic requirement of a chef." Meg's voice was gentle and magnetic. The content of his speech was vivid and interesting. His movements were naturally not stiff, and the judges were unconsciously immersed in his speech. Luna nodded repeatedly as she listened. Previously, she was a little worried that Meg would not adapt to teaching and might need her to train him. But now it seemed that this idea was completely unnecessary. Mr. Meg was simply a natural teacher. That action of taking off his clothes is so cool. Mary's focus was a little different. Although she was trying her best to listen to Mag's lecture, her gaze couldn't help but wander toward his handsome face and 8-pack waist unconsciously. The dish we are learning today is eggplant with garlic sauce. Although there is fish in the name of this dish, in fact, this dish does not use fish as an ingredient. Therefore, to make this eggplant worthy of its name, we have to work hard on the side dishes. We used eggplant with garlic sauce. Like thunder in her mind, Mary suddenly figured out why Meg's name sounded so familiar. Wasn't this the Mr. Meg from the magazine she had read on the way back? The owner of Mamie's. The one who had won the best chef at the birthday banquet of the Roth Empire's king. That eggplant with garlic sauce course had left a deep impression on her. Of course, as a young mistress who had never done any household chores, she naturally had not tried it. She simply thought that it was delicious just by looking at the course. After returning, first there was a quarrel in her family, and then she was busy preparing for the exam in seclusion. She did not have time to go to Mamie's for a meal. Who would have thought that the famous Mr. Meg would look like this? Young, handsome, good-looking, and has a good figure. It's simply amazing. No wonder Principal Luna suddenly changed her mind. It was no problem to add a major for such a master. The principal even brought him to participate in the exam according to the rules and did not reveal his identity to reduce the impact on the other teachers. With that in mind, she was embarrassed by her immature thoughts, and a sense of respect for Luna welled up in her heart. The other 4 teachers did not know about Meg's identity, but they were all nodding and jotting down notes from time to time at the sight of Meg's profound teachings. Even Olton's stern expression had changed, and he was looking at Meg with emotion in his eyes. The number of times he nodded was no less than that of the other teachers. After the oil was heated, the spices were added into the pot. Meg held the handle of the pot in one hand and a metal ladle in the other, and the aroma of the spices wafted into the air in all directions. "It smells so good." The 5 judges' eyes lit up. He was only frying the spices, but the aroma was already so alluring. Meanwhile, the aroma wafted through the air, causing a small commotion in the test rooms, which were only temporarily separated by boards. "Is it time to eat? That can't be. How long has it been since breakfast?" "Teachers, are we continuing the exam?" Continue. Don't stop." The corners of Meg's mouth curled up slightly as he listened to the voices coming from all directions. He ignored them and poured the processed eggplant into the pot. He had made some simple modifications to the eggplant with garlic sauce, and the most practical one was the recipe he had written in the column in Whole Foods last month. This was also the reason why he dared to take the exam directly today. He had already prepared his lessons a month in advance. Not long after, Meg turned off the heat and took the pot out. A bright red, fragrant eggplant with garlic sauce appeared before everyone's eyes. "This is the finished eggplant with garlic sauce. Isn't it simple?" Meg held the plate with one hand and showed it to the judges with a smile. "I'm a failure. Mary nodded. She was only greedy for the eggplant in his hand. Olton stood up and applauded. He looked at Meg with admiration and said, "Young man, I can see that you are a rare teaching prodigy. Join our Hope School." The other teachers also nodded with smiles and looked at Meg with admiration. They didn't expect to listen to a cooking lesson so seriously. Moreover, they were so engrossed in it that they took notes. They felt as if they had really learned how to make the eggplant with garlic sauce. "I agree, but before that, can I try the eggplant with garlic sauce first?" Mary said as she stared at the eggplant with garlic sauce in Meg's hand. "I think it's fine." The female teacher beside her also smiled. Chapter 22:48. A few of the judges had lunch in advance and then gave out the highest grade of evaluation one after another. Mary ate the last mouthful of rice in her bowl with a piece of eggplant and put down the bowl, still feeling a little unsatisfied. There was too little eggplant with garlic sauce, and it was too delicious, so it was finished in a few chopsticks. However, this was still the most delicious dish she had eaten since returning to Chaos City. Sour, spicy, sweet, and salty. The small piece of eggplant contained intoxicating flavors, rich and long, and lingered in the air. Of course, what was even more amazing was that this eggplant with garlic sauce was cooked right in front of them, and it still maintained an astonishing degree of completion and deliciousness. Olton stood up and looked at Meg with a joyful expression and said, "Mr. Meg, we're colleagues from now on." This morning, this was the vocational training teacher he was most satisfied with. There was no other teacher. Outstanding professional skills, simple teaching methods, immersive teaching rhythm. He even suspected that Meg had been a teacher before. "Thank you." Meg nodded with a smile. He was also very satisfied with his test. After all, he had taught Phyrus, Anna, and Mara how to cook, so he had some experience in this area, and the results were quite good. After the test, Meg didn't stay for long. He put away the kitchen utensils and cookware, and bade farewell to the judges, and left with his clothes. Meg went to the washroom, and happened to run into Mary when he went out to wash his hands. "Hi, Mr. Meg, I'm Mary. Your cooking is really good." Mary looked at him with a smile and greeted him. "You're too kind, Teacher Mary." Meg shook his head humbly and took a look at this teacher with short brown hair. Her eyebrows were delicate, and her light brown eyes were bright and intelligent. "Your restaurant is called Mamie's, right?" Mary asked. "You know?" Meg was a little surprised. With his photographic memory, he was sure that this teacher had never been to his restaurant. "I've seen your column in a magazine. I didn't remember it just now, but the eggplant with garlic sauce left a deep impression on me, so I remembered it again." Maylee smiled. "You can come to the restaurant for a meal when you have time." "Goodbye, Teacher Maylee." Meg washed his hands and turned to leave with a smile. Luna was waiting for him outside. The two of them chatted as they left. Mary looked at the backs of the two people and revealed a thoughtful expression. "The headmaster and Mr. Meg look like a perfect match," Hilla muttered softly. "Is the principal on good terms with him?" Maylee asked curiously. Hilla looked at Meg and said, "When I went to the cafeteria to get the food, I met an uncle. He said that Mr. Meg is an important investor of Hope School. Without him, there might not be Hope School. I just talked with several judges, and they all agreed that you are qualified to be a chef teacher." Luna walked beside Meg and said with a smile, "Am I accepted in advance?" Meg asked with a smile. "It's our honor to have such an outstanding chef like you as a teacher at Hope School," Luna said seriously. She watched Meg's test from the side. She was shocked by Meg's ability to control the situation. She was even more touched that he selflessly presented such a precious recipe like the eggplant with garlic sauce. She knew about the Mamie's craze in Chaos City's culinary world recently. Various restaurants were releasing the same delicacies as Mamie's. Although the taste was mostly passable, they were trying to ride on the popularity. If the children could learn a few of Meg's signature dishes from him, they could easily get a good job in various restaurants. Meg stopped in his tracks and asked her, "You didn't intend to set up a chef's major, right?" "Yes." Luna didn't hide it from him. "I will contact the construction team today. We will build a chef's practical training ground as soon as possible." Meg shook his head with a smile and said, "I was the one who suggested this major. Leave the design and construction of the practical training ground to me. I saw an empty plot of land next to the cafeteria. Can I use it?" "This?" Luna hesitated. "Actually, my idea is to set up a chef's academy. The scale may be small in the beginning, but the goal is to become the best training ground for chefs on the Northern Continent. It will become the holy land in the hearts of chefs." Meg smiled. "So, I want to make the practical training ground look more professional. I'm afraid no one else can do this." Luna looked at Meg with a smile on her face. She nodded and said, "All right, I'll leave the plot of land next to the cafeteria to you." "Thank you." Meg nodded. He walked around the school with Luna before leaving. Standing at the school gate, Meg looked back at the new teaching building with a smile on his face. Who would have thought that he would also become a glorious teacher? Even though it was just a part-time job, he still felt that it was a little amazing. Meg went to the textile factory on the way and booked a batch of outstanding night elf craftsmen from Ashley. There were still 6 days before Hope School started. He had to build the chef's practical training ground before school started so that it wouldn't affect the school's start. During lunch, Irina looked at Meg in surprise and asked, "You're going to be a teacher at Hope School?" The girls stopped what they were doing and looked at Meg. "Father, are you going to be a teacher?" Amy even jumped up from her chair in surprise. In her heart, teachers were super awesome. For example, Teacher Luna. "Boss, what are you teaching?" Mia asked curiously. "How do I make all the beautiful girls in the city fall in love with me?" Angela rested her chin on her hand. "This answer is a little close." Meg pointed at Angela. "Go to the new Oriental Chef Academy. You're going to teach the children how to cook?" Phyllis understood immediately. "Yes, Hope School has set up vocational training courses. When I went to visit the school today, I happened to meet Teacher Luna, so I applied to be a part-time teacher. I've already passed the test." Meg nodded with a smile. "Teacher Meg," Anna called out crisply. Good girl, little Anna." Meg nodded with a smile. The little girl was indeed one of his students. Won't it affect the children's studies? Irina asked. Mag shook his head slightly and said, learning is actually a means. It's not just about knowledge, magic, and martial arts. For those children who come from poor families, it's more practical to have something that can allow them to have a foothold in society and break away from their parents' poverty and inability to break free from the mire. Chapter 2249. The construction of Hope School had always been under everyone's attention. After all, Meg was an important investor, and Amy was very concerned about it. Therefore, everyone had a lot of feelings for Hope School. When they heard that the school had been completed and was about to open, and that Meg had become a part-time teacher, they became even more interested. Then, can I also be a part-time magic teacher? My spatial magic is pretty good, Barbara asked Meg as she put down the meat skewer in her hand. Her eagerness to be a teacher was burning. Meg stared at her for a while and nodded. I see that you have the demeanor of a teacher. Barbara's face lit up. She couldn't help but straighten her flat chest. What about me? I can teach the children how to sing, Gina said as she raised her hand. She loved children the most. It would be great if she could be a teacher. That's really possible. Meg nodded. Gina had already mastered the common language. Although she still had a slight accent, her pronunciation was perfect, and it didn't affect her singing at all. Moreover, her singing was indeed very good. After all, she had the voice of a mermaid that had been kissed by an angel. She was more than qualified to be a music teacher. Boss, I can be your assistant when you go to class, Rena also said with a smile. That's not a bad idea. Meg nodded. He didn't have much experience in dealing with dozens of children alone. It would be better to have an assistant. Everyone chimed in one after another, showing their great enthusiasm for going to Hope Academy to be a glorious teacher. Meg clearly rejected Angela's suggestion to teach the children how to develop their charm. Then, he looked at everyone and said, I don't have the final say on this. If you really want to be a part-time teacher in Hope School, I'll bring you there one day. Teacher Luna will have to say it. During the afternoon break, Meg worked on a design plan for the Practical Training Center alone in the study. Although it was called a Practical Training Center, it could actually be called a Comprehensive Teaching Building. Meg's idea was to build a 4-story teaching building. The first floor would be a super large kitchen that could accommodate 100 people to learn and practice cooking at the same time, as well as a food storage room. The second floor was a comprehensive teaching hall, which was divided into many classrooms. Later on, it could be divided into many cuisines for teaching. The third floor was temporarily designated as the recipe pavilion. It was used to store all kinds of recipes. Only the strong, or rather, good scholars were qualified to obtain the corresponding recipes. As for the fourth floor, it was the teacher's office. Meg completed the design with the help of the system, then ran to the north of the city and quickly arranged for the construction team of the Night Elves to enter the site. The teachers looked at the empty space next to the cafeteria that was surrounded by construction workers and started to discuss in surprise. After all, they had just received the notice yesterday that the construction of the school had been completed. Why would there be a new construction team coming in today? Furthermore, all of them were elven craftsmen. The construction will take 5 days. We'll remove all the surrounding materials by the night before school starts. It won't affect the start of school, Meg promised in Luna's office. Isn't it too rushed? Luna asked. It's all right. They're professionals. We've already reserved time. Meg waved his hand with a smile. He was very confident in this construction team of the Night Elves. The construction team entered the site and completed the handover. Meg then had a meeting with a few elven engineers to confirm the final plan and some design details. After the materials were brought in, they started right away. It was a 4-story building. Time was tight, and Meg had a lot of requests, so they had to work in 3 shifts overnight. System, I'm going to customize the kitchenware. Are you going to do this business? Meg asked in his heart as he pushed his bicycle out of the school gate. As a god of cookery cultivation system, this system only nurtures god of cookery. It doesn't do business, the system said proudly. That's a pity. There are more than 100 sets of kitchenware and furniture. Seems like I have to make a trip down. Luckily, you can buy anything in Chaos City, Meg said unhurriedly as he rode to the blacksmith shop not far away. Host, why don't we discuss it again? Discuss? What's there to discuss? I'm very glad that you're so principled. After all, there are many systems with such principles nowadays. I have to cherish them. Meg parked the bicycle in front of the blacksmith shop, put down the footrest, and walked in. As a god of cookery cultivation system, I'm a professional in making kitchenware. The system said seriously. Boss, how much does it cost to customize a set of kitchenware here? Meg asked the dwarf blacksmith who was leaning against the stove. The blacksmith put down the little pornographic book in his hand and stuffed it under his, but as he looked up at Meg and said, that depends on what set meal you want. What set meal do you have? Meg asked with a smile. The blacksmith counted with his fingers and said, set meal 1. 3-piece pot set plus 3-piece kitchen knife set plus stove *1, 800 copper coins. Set meal 2. 5-piece pot set plus 5-piece kitchen knife set plus stove *1. Magic energy stove *1, 2,800 copper coins. Set meal 3. 8-piece pot set plus 12-piece kitchen knife set plus stove *1. Magic energy stove *1. Cutting and washing table *1, 5,888 copper coins. What's so special about the things in this set meal? Meg asked again. Customer, this way please. The blacksmith got up and didn't forget to put the book in his arms. He then led Meg to the display rack at the side. On the display rack were various pots and knives of different styles, such as bone-chopping knives, kitchen knives, bloodletting knives. It was very professional and complete. All kinds of pots and utensils were enough for ordinary restaurant chefs to use in various situations. Meg checked the goods. The quality was ordinary, but it was enough to be used as teaching utensils. 100 sets. That's 588,800 copper coins. It doesn't seem expensive. Meg thought in his heart. Expensive? This is simply too expensive. They actually dared to call out such a high price for such lousy pots and knives? This is simply a black-hearted merchant. This bone-chopping knife, don't talk about magical beasts. Even the bones of ordinary wild boars can't be chopped. And that pot, the thickness of the bottom of the pot, is uneven. This kind of pot can't be used evenly and can't be used to make a perfect dish. Host, as a teacher, you let your students use kitchen utensils of such quality? This is poisoning the flowers of the motherland and wasting their youth. The system said emotionally. Is that so? I think it's quite good. The main thing is that the price is more appropriate. Meg said with a calm face. 58.88. I don't want you. Only 56.88. A more perfect, luxurious set meal to take home. The system threw out the configuration list of the luxurious set meal. 3 knives, 3 pots, 2 magic energy stoves, and a set of kitchen stoves and cutting tables. It seemed that the configuration was not as good as the set meal 3 provided by the blacksmith, but it made the corner of Meg's mouth curl up. He actually didn't like fancy things. Whether it was knives or pots, enough was enough. It didn't mean more was better. Isn't this set meal 1? Then I can only give you 888. Meg said. Chapter 2250. In the end, Meg completed the purchase task at the price of 889. It smells good. I want this paring knife. Meg gave the dwarf blacksmith a silver coin, took the shiny silver paring knife, and walked out of the blacksmith shop in a good mood, humming a tune. I thought it was a big customer, the blacksmith muttered, put the silver coin in his pocket, took out the book again, and leaned against the stove to read. Meg didn't intend to order from the blacksmith from the beginning. The craftsmanship was a bit rough, and not as good as Mabai and Lulu, not to mention compared to the system. The set meal provided by the system was enough for a professional chef, let alone just for teaching. As for teaching aids such as tables and chairs, they were also purchased from the system. Now he just had to wait for the teaching building to be built, put all these things in, and wait for the arrival of the students. Meg was in a good mood, so he returned to the restaurant, looked at the small blackboard hanging at the door, and went in with the board. After a while, he came out with the board again. On it was written, today's new item, spicy field snail. The weather was cold, and the number of customers drinking beer had decreased. Rum had become a good substitute. However, there were few dishes in the restaurant that went with alcohol, and this spicy field snail was launched for that. It was a professional dish that went with alcohol. Meg returned to the restaurant and looked at Anne, who was sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, drawing. He walked forward with a smile and looked at the drawing board in front of her from the side. The painting was very simple. There was a blue sky and white clouds and a corner of the Aden Square. There wasn't much technique mixed in, and it made people feel relaxed. There wasn't even a clear main body. It was just sitting there and looking at the things in sight. However, Meg felt that the painting looked very comfortable, as if the scenery was included in the painting, and added the last stroke, put down the pen, and turned to look at Meg with a smile on her face. "It's very beautiful," Meg praised with a smile, and picked up a picture book from the table beside her and handed it to Meg, saying in sign language, "A new picture book." Meg took the picture book. There was an orange swan on the picture. The name of the book was The Ugly Duckling. Meg opened the picture book with mixed feelings. After a while, Meg looked at the grill on the bonfire at the end of the page and the golden roast goose dripping with oil. His throat rolled as he couldn't hold back his laughter. This was probably a modified version of Ugly Duckling dictated by Amy. It was too tragic. However, this story actually had a moral. Did you think that life had deceived you? Actually, that was not the case. Life was already destined. No matter how hard Ugly Duckling tried, it could only become a roast goose. All right. In fact, the ending of the story did not turn into roast goose. Ugly Duckling escaped with its life, and the duck that had bullied it since it was young became a roasted duck and an orange swan. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, which was napping on the counter, and wondered how it would feel after reading this story. "It's quite good," Meg nodded. If he put aside his preconceived ideas, the story of this version of Ugly Duckling was actually more twisted and fantastical. It was quite interesting. After all, he didn't understand at first how a four-legged beast that hatched from an egg could become an orange swan that could fly in the sky. With the addition of the two little fellows' magical imagination, the story became more childlike and interesting. The story of a little orange cat working hard to grow up, defeating a bad duck, and pursuing its dream of flying was even more inspirational. Is it because it can't be printed? And looked at Meg with a slightly disappointed expression. Meg smiled and said, "No, let's try to print 5,000 copies later, after the mermaid picture books are sold out." Anne's eyes lit up, and she nodded with a smile. Meg sat down opposite her and took the picture book that he had roughly flipped through just now and looked at it again. Anne's drawing skills were still improving. Although it wasn't obvious compared to Miss Black Cat's picture book, the details were more vivid and natural. The main characters of this story were Ugly Duckling and various small animals. It was much simpler than Miss Black Cat's complicated characters and costumes, but the outstanding details made the picture book more readable. It was easy to be touched by the various cuteness of the small animals, especially the little silly Ugly Duckling. Its various charmingly naive looks were perfectly presented in the picture book. It was obvious that, and had been observing it very carefully. "I think we can print 10,000 copies directly." Meg changed his mind. This was a picture book targeted at younger children. After it was released into the market, it might have some incredible effects. There were more and more customers who wanted to buy the Little Mermaid picture book these 2 days. Many were even queuing up just for the picture book, and had also become the idol of many little fellows. Meg often heard conversations about, and they were all scenes of children looking for and everywhere. The little fellow had become a real artist and was loved by many people. "Miss, today's 1,000 copies of the picture book are all sold out. There are customers who want to increase the price and buy the rest of the picture books from us for 3,000 copper coins." Mara ran into the tavern and said to AI Faye with surprise and joy, "It's all sold out?" AI Faye was stunned. That was 1,000 copies of the picture book, and it was sold at 2,000 copper coins per copy. She had just received the picture book that Meg entrusted someone to send to her last night. This morning, she followed Meg's arrangement and sold it to the public at the Titan Tavern. She didn't expect that in just half a day, the picture book that was limited to 2 copies per person had already been sold out. That was a huge sum of 2 million copper coins. Yes, there weren't many people buying it first. But after a customer bought it, he seemed to have gone somewhere to promote it. Then a group of people came to buy it. In a short while, the 1,000 copies were sold out. Mara nodded. Her hands were still a little weak as she counted the money. I see. AI Faye was deep in thought. It seemed that the value of the picture book was higher than the selling price. Otherwise, there wouldn't be people who wanted to buy it at a price of 1,000 copper coins. Moreover, they wanted to monopolize it all. Mara looked at AI Faye and urged, Miss, that customer is still waiting outside. Why don't we sell the rest of the picture books to him? We can earn another 900,000 copper coins for master. Although she wasn't very good at counting, she was still very clear about this account. If she sold the rest of the picture books to that customer, not only would she earn more money, she would also save herself the trouble of selling it. Tell him that we won't sell the picture books as a package and we won't increase the price. From tomorrow onwards, each person will be limited to 1 copy and priority will be given to the customers who come to the tavern. AI Faye shook her head and said, Meg had already predicted that this would happen in the letter. He also specifically asked her not to sell the picture books as a package. The more customers, the better. This was because this was not only an excellent picture book, but also an advertisement for the Black Cat Song Troupe. Chapter 2251. Wow, that's a great drawing. Boss Hades' daughter is a genius painter. You've painted me so well. This picture book is going to be a hit. Looks like our opera house is going to be a hit too. The Black Cat Song Troupe's cast huddled together to look at the picture book. Mara had sent it to their troupe leader in the morning. They only saw it during their break time and were all amazed. It was a wonderful feeling to see their daily opera in the form of a picture book and completely exceed their expectations. They also knew that Mr. Hades had spent 5 million copper coins to buy the exclusive rights to use Miss Black Cat's picture book. These few days, the opera house was closed for renovation. They were all rehearsing in the backyard, waiting for the opera house's renovation to be completed so that they could welcome the audience with a brand new look. They were originally worried that the frequent closure would cause a loss of customers after just a few days of operation. But after seeing the picture book, their worries disappeared. Instead, they began to look forward to the scene of the opera house being filled with customers. But the price of a single copy of this picture book is 2,000 copper coins. Mara said that she would sell 1,000 copies today. That means that she can sell 2 million copper coins in just one day. Wow! Doesn't that mean that this picture book could sell for tens of millions of copper coins? Looks like the troupe leader made a stupid decision. The cast whispered, What are you all crowding around for? Don't rehearse. The opera house will reopen in 2 days. If you screw up and embarrass me, I'll teach you all a lesson. Vicky scolded as she walked out. Everyone quickly put down the picture book and scattered. Vicky picked up the picture book on the table, the corner of her mouth twitching. She knew more. Mr. Hades had sent a total of 10,000 picture books to AI Faye. The price was 2,000 copper coins per copy, and there was a limit of 1,000 copies per day. She had just been relaxing on the second floor when she saw that Mara had finished work. 1,000 picture books had been sold out in half a day. The demand was completely outstripping the supply. That meant that these 10,000 picture books would all be sold in 10 days, making a net profit of 20 million copper coins. With no promotion and a high price, Miss Black Cat suddenly became popular. It would be a lie to say that she didn't regret it. Vicky's heart was bleeding right now. Her original expectation was that Hades would release an ink version of the picture book in a few months. With Anne's excellent drawing skills and story, Miss Black Cat would sell well. However, after deducting the various expenses, with the meager profit from the black and white edition, the annual profit would not be too high. However, she did not expect Hades to be so efficient and complete the printing in just a few days. What was even more unexpected was that he actually took out a super high-definition color print. She was someone who had seen the original version, but when she got the picture book this morning, she almost couldn't tell that it was a copy. According to her understanding, the printing technology on the Norland continent was still in the stage of black and white printing. Not to mention such advanced color printing technology they didn't even understand the basic principles of color printing. Hades's way of doing things was simply like cheating. This is the color printing technology. Did someone smuggle the printing machine out of the dungeon? Vicky muttered to herself. She still found it unbelievable. This was the only explanation that could explain it. But no matter what, the color printing directly made Miss Black Cat the secret to wealth. The exquisite style and outstanding colors of the picture book were perfectly preserved by the color printing, and the exciting story was far better than most of the picture books on the market. Vicky was sure that the Miss Black Cat picture book would definitely be a hit and bring Hades a huge return. And originally, she was also qualified to share part of the return. On the bright side, if the Miss Black Cat picture book is a hit, then there should be more people willing to walk into the Black Cat Opera House to listen to the opera version of Miss Black Cat. Vicky smiled. Mr. Hades's 5 million copper coins were not a bad deal for her. She used the money to completely upgrade the opera house from a modified circus to a real professional opera house. An auditorium that could accommodate 1,000 audience members at the same time, a stage that could perform large-scale operas, and a few newly hired theater staff. These were all things that she didn't dare to imagine before, but now she had achieved them in one go. Mr. Hades was her benefactor, and this was something she had to remember. The success of the Miss Black Cat picture book was more due to his outstanding business acumen and operation. She also dismissed the idea of asking she to investigate the color printing. If the printing machine really came from the underground city, she might just erase Hades in order to hide the existence of the underground city. But the next time I see Mr. Hades, I can still ask him a little. After all, I have to keep a low profile with this thing. Vicky muttered to herself. Meg did not expect that someone would associate the color printing with the underground city. But after pushing the blame to the Night Elves, he felt a lot more relaxed. As long as they talked about the color printing, he would directly ask them to go out and turn left to find the Night Elves. If we don't drink, can't we suck out the snails? At the dinner table, Barbara held a snail and frowned. The other girls had similar expressions and looked at the hard-shell snails in their hands helplessly. Mag also made a portion of the new dish that was released tonight for everyone during dinner. However, after smelling the spicy and fresh snails and taking a sip of the spicy soup, the girls were stumped. Slurp, slurp, slurp. Amy, who had sucked 3 snails, put down the shell and chewed on the snail meat. She looked at everyone and shook her head. No, you can suck it out even without drinking. The snails are delicious. Everyone looked at each other and felt a little hot on their faces. At times like this, strength creates miracles. Irina took out a hammer and a small chopping board from somewhere. She placed the snail on the chopping board and raised her hand to hammer it. The shell broke, leaving a piece of snail meat intact. Irina thumped it a few times and then ate with chopsticks. Meg smiled. He had expected everyone to be at a loss. He picked up a snail, took a sip of the soup, and pinched it with 2 fingers. He demonstrated while saying, "There's actually a technique to sucking the snail. Put the snail to your mouth, wrap it with your lips, and breathe in your energy center. Then when the snail is not paying attention, gently suck and the meat will naturally fall into your mouth. This kind of snail has a soul. The tail has been processed, leaving only the head. It's all edible, so feel free to suck it," Meg reminded them. Chapter 2252. Sucking the snail was a technical job. Even though Meg had already given them the trick, the girls still couldn't master it. At this time, the toothpick came in handy. Meg didn't care about using toothpicks. To him, snails that were picked out with toothpicks were soulless. But he had to admit that compared to Irina's posture of smashing the snails with a hammer, using toothpicks was indeed much more elegant. This snail meat is so springy. It's spicy and crunchy. It's delicious. Mia picked out a snail meat and bit it lightly with a smile on her face. Yeah, the more you chew, the more fragrant it is. It's spicy and refreshing. It's a pity that we can't drink now. It's a perfect match for wine. Angela already had a few more snail shells in her hands. She picked up a snail with her fingers and put it in her mouth. The snail meat fell into her mouth, Meg looked at her sparkling red lips. This was probably the so-called racial advantage. She learned it quickly. I plan to bring everyone to the Demon Islands for a vacation in a few days. Is everyone okay with the schedule? Meg said to everyone, "Can we go swimming by the sea?" Mia's eyes lit up as she asked happily. Meg nodded with a smile. "Yes, you can bring your swimsuit. I like the sea. I can eat a lot of seafood there." Amy's eyes were also sparkling as she thought of the time when she was temporarily staying on the Demon Islands. "Yeah, there are also many seafood merchants," Angela said with a smile. Meg looked at her. He felt that she was driving, but he had no evidence. After dinner and a short break, Meg opened the restaurant's door and started business. "Welcome, Amy's." Meg stood at the door with a smile. His gaze swept across the familiar faces in the long line at the door. His gaze paused on a middle-aged man with a square face in the line, but he quickly moved on naturally. "You're here indeed?" Meg's lips curled up slightly. It was Rankster, the man who was as powerful as him. Even though Zhang Xian had disguised himself and concealed his aura, he was still seen through with a single glance. Dragons were never good at doing such things. To be able to conceal themselves to such an extent was enough to fool most people. At the very least, he was standing in the middle of the group, wearing a luxurious robe. He looked like an ordinary wealthy merchant, and there was nothing special about him. What surprised Meg was that Elizabeth didn't tag along. He wondered if she had come to Chaos City. Ever since she left, the restaurant hadn't recruited any new employees. They were short of manpower and were quite busy. If she was willing to come back, that would be for the best. However, the Dragon King, Rankster, had returned. When he saw that his daughter was working in a restaurant, he gave an order. He didn't know if 100,000 soldiers would tear down his restaurant. Just the thought of it was a little scary. Meg's imagination was running wild. Rankster followed the team and was also sizing up Meg. At first, he thought that Yabamiya had been deceived and imprisoned to become a waitress in a restaurant. He had to take revenge for his daughter, who had suffered. However, after Elizabeth told him the whole story, he found out that it was this restaurant's owner, Meg, who had taken in Mia, who had almost starved to death. He took her in and treated her very well. That was why he gave up on the idea of tearing down the restaurant. The name Meg sounded very familiar. He only recalled it when he was queuing up earlier. Wasn't Alex's name Meg? Suspicions arose in his heart. At this moment, he could not help but carefully size up this young boss. Their ages matched. They both looked to be in their early 30s. However, no matter whether it was their appearance or height, there was an obvious difference between the two. Humans were different from other species. It wasn't easy for them to change their physiques. And a proud fellow like Alex wouldn't be able to change his appearance and hide in Chaos City to be a restaurant's owner and chef. With his culinary skills, it wasn't as if he hadn't tasted his burnt pheasant back then. He quickly retracted his gaze and made a basic judgment of Meg in his heart. He was an ordinary human, but his physical strength was not bad. He was about the standard of a second-tier knight. However, there weren't many traces of battle training on him, so his actual combat ability was probably not at the standard of a second-tier knight. Then, he looked into the restaurant with anticipation and a little fear. His daughter, the daughter who had been separated from him when she was still in his womb, and whom he had never seen before, was about to meet him. The fearless Rankster was a little scared now. He was scared that she would ask him why he hadn't come to look for her all these years. He was scared that she would ask him why he had abandoned her and her mother back then and let them suffer so much humiliation and misery. He was a terrible husband and a terrible father. Yabamiya. This name was given by him back then. He had just mentioned it casually. He didn't expect her to remember it and really give her this name. Rankster walked past Meg calmly and stepped into the restaurant. His gaze landed on Yabamiya, who was standing at the side with a smile on her face. He was stunned and immediately stopped in his tracks. She was standing there gracefully with a smile on her face, but it reminded him of the first time he saw that young lady in the bushes. She was just 18 years old that year and met him. Countless memories flashed past his mind. He had thought that he was heartless and wouldn't be easily affected by such emotions. Now he finally understood that he was just lying to himself. "Sir, please come in. The customers behind still have to come in." Mia's voice broke his memories. "Okay." Rankster nodded and smiled awkwardly at Yabamiya. Then, he walked to an empty seat at the side and sat down. This person is so strange. Mia looked at Rankster and murmured in her heart. However, she quickly collected her thoughts and continued to welcome the customers in. She also started to take their orders. After Rankster sat down, he quickly regained his composure. He looked at Yabamiya casually, and his heart ached a little when he saw her counting. He felt a little comforted at the same time. She must have had a hard time all these years. However, the golden dragon bloodline in her body had been completely activated. She was now a pure golden dragon. Her royal bloodline was extremely pure. According to Elizabeth, she had only activated her bloodline for less than half a year, and her power had already reached the 5th tier. Her innate talent was even higher than Elizabeth's when she was young. She was indeed Rankster's daughter. With such talent, she would be the only one who could sit on the golden throne in the future. Soon, he had already started to plan Yabamiya's path of advancement in his mind. He included what skills and techniques he should teach her at this level, what mystic realm to explore, and what magical beast to catch as her guardian beast. "Sir, what would you like to order?" A familiar voice sounded by his ear. Chapter 2253. Rankster looked up and met Yabamiya's gaze. He immediately stood up like a child who had done something wrong. He looked at Mia with an unnatural expression and said, I want to order." Mia saw his reaction and found it interesting. He was already so old. Could it be that this was his first time coming to a restaurant to order food? However, she still said gently, "The menu is here. You can choose what you want to eat." Rankster looked at the menu and calmed down a lot. He said, "Then give me a portion of all the dishes. If you're alone, you probably can't finish so many dishes. We can't waste food at Mamie's, so I can't order all the dishes for you." Mia put down the little book in her hand and looked at Rankster seriously as she said, "Food is very precious, and my boss time is even more precious. There are still many customers waiting to eat." Rankster looked at Mia's lecturing look and felt both amused and angry. This girl, her boss, is the most important, right? I'm the Frost Dragon King, and I can't even order a table of dishes? Then, miss, what do you think I should order? It's my first time here, so I don't really know, Rankster said to Yabamiya with a smile as he sat down again. In principle, Meg didn't allow them to recommend dishes to the customers. Giving the customers more freedom to choose would reduce their workload at the same time. However, this uncle gave her a special feeling. Maybe it was because he looked a little lonely when he came to eat alone, or maybe it was because the way he stood up in a hurry just now made her feel a little sad and amused. She thought for a while and pointed at the Buddha jumps over the wall. If you want to nourish your body, you can order a portion of Buddha jumps over the wall. It's super delicious, and it'll be gone if you're late. Rankster looked at the price of 10,000 copper coins. It was much higher than the price of the dishes beside it. The corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. She's really my precious daughter. However, he still nodded with a smile. All right, then I'll have a portion of Buddha jumps over the wall. What else? Do you like bland food, or can you eat spicy food? Mia asked again. Anything is fine. Then we can have another serving of salty, sweet, and soft red braised pork, a serving of eggplant with garlic sauce that goes well with rice, and a beggar's chicken that's crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. That should be enough. Mia looked at Rankster and said, Wouldn't that be too much? That's fine. I'll order more if it's not enough. Rankster nodded. To a giant dragon, this amount of food was not much at all. Okay, please wait a moment. Mia nodded and turned to the next customer. Rankster looked at Mia's busy figure, and his gaze softened. A fatherly smile appeared on his face. Sister, and look at that uncle. He's staring at Sister Mia. Amy put her head on Ugly Duckling's head and pointed at Rankster with her little finger. LSPs. Angela happened to pass by and looked at Rankster following Amy's finger. Luckily, this uncle looked quite upright, and his gaze was not evil. Instead, he looked quite gentle like an elder. Spicy river snails. Looks good. Georgina went to visit her grandma today. We can have a few glasses. Rum is good stuff. Harrison chuckled as he looked at George. You can have a few more glasses. I still have to sleep with my little princess Chris tonight. I can't drink too much. George shook his head, but there was a hint of pride in his tone. TSK. I'll sleep with the little princess tonight. I'll watch over her. Harrison patted his chest. You're not worthy. George rejected him without hesitation. Humph. I'll give birth to one myself in 2 years, Harrison said angrily. He was really envious. He wasn't envious at all when he saw who his son was. He even gloated a little. However, ever since baby Chris was born, he did feel a little jealous when he saw her grow up day by day. She became more and more adorable, and she even called him Daddy in her baby voice. When are you and Georgina planning to get married? George asked. We'll have to wait until next year. She said she'll bring me to meet her father soon. What should I do if I'm a little scared? Harrison seemed a little guilty. Scared that her father will call you brother? George teased. Scram, am I that old? You found yourself a little wife. Indeed, as long as a man works hard, his wife is still underage. Georgina is an adult. Her birthday was just 2 days ago. Harrison said solemnly. Oh, so we could do things now? Scram! Rankster looked at the 2 fat humans sitting beside him. He thought he could sit and eat alone. He didn't expect there to be 3 other people sharing a table, and 2 of them were chatterboxes. Rankster, have never shared a table with anyone in my life. He didn't finish a sentence in the end because the 4th person was led to sit down by Mia. According to Amy's rules, customers were allowed to share a table by default. Elves and demons were already sitting at the same table. It didn't seem like a big deal for him to share a table with a human. What kind of magic does this restaurant have? How can it make so many customers so obedient? The boss doesn't seem to be very powerful, Rankster thought. Rankster murmured in his heart. He glanced at the waiters in the restaurant, and a look of surprise appeared on his face. The lady over there, whose race he couldn't tell, was actually a 9th-tier water magic caster. She was definitely a prodigy of the Norland continent at such a young age and with such power. The lady who was standing beside the counter and using spatial magic to serve the dishes was an 8th-tier magic caster, and a very rare spatial magic caster. And that little succubus who was naturally seductive was also an 8th-tier magic caster. And that half-elf girl sitting behind the counter with a fat orange cat in her arms. 7th tier? Rankster's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. This little girl looked like she was only 3 or 4 years old, but she was already a 7th-tier magic caster. No, judging from the magic waves in her body, she was even about to cross the threshold of an 8th-tier magic caster. What kind of terrifying talent was this? In a small restaurant, there was a 9th-tier water magic caster, an 8th-tier spatial magic caster, an 8th-tier succubus, and a genius half-elf magic caster as waiters. He couldn't help but re-evaluate Meg. Who was he? How could he gather them here and make them willingly stay and be lowly waiters? Meg didn't know what Rankster was thinking. Otherwise, he would definitely want to tell Rankster that it wasn't just what it looked like on the surface. There was also the current leader of the Wind Forest, Sally, the great chief of the Orcs, Connie, the new chief of the Vampires, Camilla, the princess of the Moon Nation, Barbara, the princess of the Merfolk, Sally, and your precious daughters Elizabeth and Yabamia. The Princess Harvester lived up to her name. Chapter 2254. Rankster was still immersed in the shock brought to him by the overly powerful abilities of this restaurant's waitress and young lady when a voice interrupted his thoughts. Your Buddha jumps over the wall, red braised pork, beggar's chicken, and eggplant with garlic sauce. Mia placed the dishes on the tray in front of Rankster one by one, and opened the lid of the Buddha jumps over the wall with a smile. A rich, meaty aroma immediately wafted out. This was the first Buddha jumps over the wall that Amy's had tonight. The meaty aroma instantly filled the air, and many customers followed the aroma and looked over. Meanwhile, Rankster, who was sitting in front of the Buddha jumps over the wall, had a dazed expression. It was too fragrant. The aroma of meat was mixed with the intoxicating aroma of wine. He really couldn't imagine what kind of ingredients and cooking methods were used to make such a fragrant soup. I'm afraid that even the gods and Buddhas would climb over the wall and come out when they smelled this aroma. Rankster murmured as he instantly understood the chilliness of this dish's name. There were all kinds of ingredients floating in the brown soup. They were visibly soft but still maintained the same shape and didn't fall apart because of the long period of stewing. Rankster wasn't particular about food. His goal was to continuously become stronger. As for food that could fill his stomach, it was fine as long as it could be eaten. But at this moment, he felt a desire for this soup. Boom! Mia used a small wooden hammer to lightly knock on the top of the beggar's chicken's eggshell-like mud shell. Cracks instantly covered the eggshell and then spread out like a lotus flower, revealing the beggar's chicken that was roasted golden yellow inside. The aroma of the roasted chicken spread out with the disappearance of the mud shell, and Rankster couldn't help but look over. This roasted chicken looks great too. Rankster's eyes lit up. The golden roasted chicken with a little bit of oil was fragrant and alluring. Even under the suppression of Buddha jumps over the wall, it still maintained its unique aroma. Please enjoy. Mia kept the hammer and turned to walk towards the kitchen. Rankster took the small bowl and scooped a spoonful of soup into his mouth directly. The aroma of the wine seeped into the soup and slowly seeped into his taste buds. That mesmerizing taste made him unable to differentiate if it was wine or soup. How did the taste of so many ingredients fuse into this small mouthful of soup? Not only was it not abrupt, but the rich layering made people indulge. This was simply the culinary skill of a master. He took another bite of meat. The soft and tender chicken meat had a rich, meaty aroma. When chewed, it was soft but not rotten. The aftertaste was endless. He scooped up a piece of shark's fin with a spoon, and the smooth shark's fin slid into his mouth almost instantly. The shark's fin that was soaked in soup had a very wonderful texture and a wonderful taste, bringing a completely different experience from chicken. Rankster felt his scalp tingle, and sweat appeared on his forehead. He had never tasted anything like this in his life. Not long after, the entire Buddha jumps over the wall soup was in his stomach. He put down the clean little cup in his hand and licked his lips as if he hadn't had enough yet. Looking at the clean bottom of the pot, he was stunned but also a little amused. Hades and George raised their eyebrows in surprise. This uncle finished the Buddha jumps over the wall soup that cost 10,000 copper coins in one go, as if he was drinking a bowl of hot soup before a meal. Unfortunately, they didn't know that this was already considered a very elegant way of eating for Lantis. After all, it was his first time using a spoon. Is it because I've been lonely for too long? Rankster thought to himself as he picked up the golden roast chicken. The roast chicken wasn't considered small. If it was measured by a human's appetite, it should be enough for an adult's meal. Rankster tore off a drumstick and bit off half of it. The crispy chicken skin was bitten off gently, and the tender meat melted in his mouth. The tender meat that belonged to chicken bloomed instantly. The taste buds on the tip of his tongue were disarmed immediately. He didn't have time to chew, and before it could gain a firm foothold on the tip of his tongue, it slid down his throat like a naughty little chick. Tender without any residue, with a unique flavor. This unexpected delicacy shocked Rankster a little. Different from the chicken in the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, this chicken had a roasted aroma and a different flavor. It made the meat more prominent, and it became the real main character. Amazing! Rankster's brows relaxed. He felt that he had been captured by this chicken. He finished the remaining half of the drumstick in one bite, and even swallowed the crispy drumstick bone. Gulp! Harrison's Adams apple bobbed. Although he was just casually looking at this uncle who had a righteous appearance and a wild eating manner, he still couldn't help it. But you don't say. The way he eats, it looked quite appetizing. It was easy to get hungry. George, on the other hand, gave him a look and signaled him not to stare at him. Judging from his table manners, this person shouldn't be human. Even if orcs imitated humans, they would still retain some orc characteristics, such as the cat ears of cat-eared girls and the fluffy tail of vixens. Most demons disdained to imitate humans. They had a proud sense of racial superiority. Hence, this person could very likely be from Dragon Island and was a giant dragon. Giant dragons were not to be trifled with. Even if this was Chaos City, it was best not to provoke a giant dragon. Harrison retracted his gaze and turned to look in the direction of the kitchen. He wondered when the dishes he ordered would be served. A beggar's chicken quickly went into Rankster's stomach. He picked up the glass of water at the side and finished it in one gulp. He felt slightly satisfied, and at this moment he seemed to understand why these few ladies stayed in this restaurant. He was willing to call this boss's culinary skills the best. As for the thoughts that he had previously, he had already thrown them to the back of his mind. A chef with such superb culinary skills must have spent most of his energy on studying culinary skills. First, he eliminated Alex. Since it wasn't Alex, then it didn't matter who it was. Anyway, it was just a normal person to him. Then his gaze turned to the remaining red braised pork and eggplant with garlic sauce. The eggplant with garlic sauce looked like a fish, but if one looked closely, they would realize that it wasn't a fish that had been carved. It was a whole eggplant that had been carved into the shape of a fish after being delicately carved. A vegetarian dish? Rankster frowned slightly. Ever since he was born, Rankster had eaten meat, drunk alcohol, and killed people all his life. He had never been a vegetarian. Even when he had sunk to the bottom of the valley and was in his most difficult years, he had never eaten anything vegetarian. He looked up and saw Yabamiya, who was busy. Thinking that this was the dish that she had strongly recommended, he picked up his chopsticks hesitantly. For Mia's sake, I'll have a bite. He picked up a bit of eggplant and put it into his mouth. Chapter 22:55. The four flavors of sour, spicy, sweet, and salty exploded in his mouth at the same time. Each flavor was so prominent, but when they blended together, it was so harmonious and delicious. The soft eggplant melted in his mouth, and his taste buds rejoiced in the music of all kinds of flavors. He swallowed it gently, and the fragrance lingered in his mouth. This taste is so meaty. Even real fish can't compare to this. Rankster narrowed his eyes slightly as he looked at the eggplant with garlic sauce. He reached out his chopsticks unconsciously with a conflicted expression. Just one bite? Just one more? It smells so good. One more bite. A little salty? One bite of rice? Just one bite. They're so compatible. Eat it all. This red braised pork is delicious too. It's soft and sticky, and there's a hint of sweetness in the sauce. Harrison's dishes had just been served, and Rankster had already finished the three main dishes, one vegetable dish, and a big pot of rice in front of him. Rankster touched his stomach and felt that he was only 30% full. So, he raised his hand again. Sir, finished eating? Yabamiya walked over and looked at the empty plate in front of Rankster in shock. Rankster nodded with a smile. Yes, I want to serve all the dishes just now. Mia shook her head slightly and said, the other three dishes are fine, but each customer can only order one serving of Buddha jumps over the wall. You can change to another dish like Peking duck or something. All right, then I'll take that. Rankster nodded. He thought for a while and said, then I'll change the other three dishes to other dishes too. Rankster finally ordered all the dishes on Amy's menu for this meal and finished them all. Uncle, you're amazing. You've done something I didn't dare to do. Harrison, who was watching the whole process, gave Rankster, who was touching his stomach with satisfaction, a thumbs up. Rankster smiled and stood up to pay the bill. He took the takeout fried rice and glanced at Yabamiya before leaving the restaurant. Is this the first customer to finish our menu? Barbara clicked her tongue in wonder. That's right. His appetite is astonishing. It's not easy to feed himself. Angela nodded. If she could eat so much, she would have starved to death on the Demon Islands. This uncle is quite interesting. Mia smiled and muttered to herself. However, their busy work soon made them forget about this little episode. Rankster looked at Elizabeth, who was eating her fried rice, with a smile, and asked, by the way, do those ladies who work in the restaurant stay because they want to eat boss's food for free every day? Elizabeth paused in the middle of eating and looked at Rankster with a strange expression. She thought seriously for a while and said, yes and no. The delicious food is the reason why they stayed, but what made them give up their original identities and stay in the restaurant to take on that seemingly simple job was the atmosphere of the restaurant. It was the feeling of home. Does it feel like home? Rankster was deep in thought. He looked at Elizabeth in silence for a while. You worked at Mamie's before, too? Cough, cough, cough. Elizabeth suddenly choked and then started coughing. Rankster quickly conjured a glass of iced water for her and passed it over. Elizabeth drank a few mouthfuls of water and calmed down. She looked at the glass of iced water in her hand and calmly said, if it was Boss Meg, then this would be a glass of warm water. Rankster scratched his head and smiled awkwardly. I've learned it. Elizabeth finished all the fried rice on her plate and put down her spoon. She looked at Rankster and asked, Father, when do you plan to reunite with Mia? A smile appeared in Rankster's eyes at the mention of Mia. I saw her just now. She looks very obedient. She looks a little like you, but her temper is softer. Do you think my temper is bad? Elizabeth asked. And no. Rankster's expression froze again. I mean, the hardships in life didn't make her depressed. This makes me very happy. So, when do you plan to reunite with her? Let's do it today. I'll wait for her on her way home from work, Rankster said. Okay. Elizabeth nodded. See you tomorrow. Meg stood at the door and waved at the girls as he watched the young and energetic girls leave. Do you think Rankster will reunite with Mia today? Irina asked with a smile as she stood behind Meg with a glass of milk in her hand. Meg turned around and saw the milk stains on her lips. He nodded with a smile. I think so. He's not a patient guy. What about you? Irina licked her lips and revealed a charming smile. Same for me. Meg closed the door and then carried Irina in his arms. I'm just playing with you. I haven't finished my milk yet, Irina chided. It's all right. There will be plenty later. On the long street, two figures stood against the moonlight. The girls who were about to return to the dormitory were alarmed. Yabamiya stopped in her tracks immediately. Her eyes lit up when she saw the two figures. However, when her gaze landed on the tall figure, there was a hint of fear. It's Elizabeth? Gina exclaimed in surprise and let down her guard. It's really Elizabeth. Everyone quickly confirmed who the girl next to her was. Barbara, however, narrowed her eyes as she looked at the man standing next to Elizabeth. It was a familiar aura. She had seen this man before on the battlefront in the far north. Rankster, that frost dragon who had caused a lot of trouble for the Allied army. He was also Elizabeth's father. Why did he appear in Chaos City? And why did he block their way? Everyone, you can go back first. I want to be alone with Elizabeth for a while, Mia said. Although the girls were a little puzzled, they still went back to their dormitory and residence after bidding farewell to Elizabeth. Only the three of them were left on the street. Mia! Elizabeth walked up quickly and hugged Mia. When she was on the brink of death on the battlefront in the icy plain, she thought of Mia more. Her sister was one of the few people in this world who still cared and loved her. Big sister. Yabamiya also hugged her tightly. She had missed and worried about her day and night, and finally got a perfect ending in this hug. It was naturally the best that her elder sister was fine. After that, her gaze landed on that tall figure. Tears were already glistening in her eyes. She softly said, Is that him? Chapter 2256. Father. What a foreign and yearning title. In the cold night, she had huddled in her mother's arms and asked her what kind of person her father was. She said that he was a tall and mighty man, a hero who would come back on a rainbow cloud one day to bring them to a better life. Her mother didn't make it through that cold winter and didn't have the chance to see her hero again. Now she saw him. He was indeed tall and mighty, but unfortunately, he didn't have the rainbow cloud and wasn't the hero in her heart. Elizabeth let go of Mia and said to Rankster, Yes, Mia. This is our father. Mia? Rankster took a step forward. Why? Why did you only appear now? Mia choked as tears flowed down her face. She used to think that she would be very happy, but when she really saw this man, she only thought of her mother who died of illness in the cold winter night. It was just a minor illness, but how could her frail body survive the hunger and cold? At that time, where was her peerless hero? Rankster suddenly stopped in his tracks. He looked at the teary-faced Yabamiya with guilt and self-blame in his heart. Elizabeth stood at the side and pursed her lips, not saying anything. She looked at Mia with heartache. Your mother. Did she talk to you about me? Rankster asked softly. She said you were her hero, and that you would come back on a rainbow cloud one day to bring us back. Mia looked at Rankster and shook her head. She sobbed and said, but you lied to her. Do you know how difficult it is for a human woman to survive in Chaos City with a half-dragon child? You asked her to wait for you, and she waited for you year after year. She entrusted the best time of her life to an illusory promise of yours. I'm sorry, Mia. I've let you and your mother down. Rankster blamed himself deeply and clenched his fists subconsciously. An outstanding woman like her would have had a bright future if she hadn't met him back then. But because of him, she had spent the rest of her life in pain. Mia looked at Rankster and walked forward slowly. His face was resolute and handsome, but it was filled with self-blame and pain at this moment. She suddenly stood still and looked at the man in front of her, the man who had made her mother love him to death and was willing to wait for him for the rest of her life. Just like that, all the complaints and blame suddenly disappeared. Mother, have you forgiven him? Or have you never complained about him? She looked at the faintly glowing ring necklace on her chest and stared blankly for a moment. The ring seemed to have a spirit as it floated up from Mia's chest. It actually broke free from the rope and flew towards Rankster. Rankster looked at the ring floating in front of him and was stunned. He reached out his right hand and pinched the ring gently. The silver ring had an ice crystal embedded in it. This was the love token he gave her back then, and it was the only thing he had. Although it wasn't priceless, if they sold this ring, it would be enough for them to live a comfortable life in Chaos City. The white light on the silver ring gradually dimmed until it disappeared. Rankster felt as if something in his heart had disappeared along with it. He felt empty. Yabamiya also looked up at the sky. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held them back. When she was young, her mother hated to see her cry the most. This was the last time she couldn't cry. After a long time, Rankster put his hand down and walked to Yabamiya. He bent down and hugged her gently. Mia's emotions finally exploded at this moment. She hugged Rankster tightly, as if she was afraid of losing him again, but also as if she wanted to vent all her longing. So this was a father's hug. It was indeed very warm, generous, and gave her a sense of security. Mia let go of her hand and took 2 steps back. She looked up at Rankster, and a vibrant smile appeared on her face again. She said, "Father, I am Mia, Yabamiya." Rankster was stunned when he saw Yabamiya's smile. He also smiled. He reached out his right hand and placed it on Mia's head gently. He gently said, "From today onwards, you are Yabamiya Cleveland, the princess of the Frost Dragon tribe." Yabamiya Cleveland. Mia repeated her name softly, and the smile on her face became even brighter. "Mia, come back with us to Frost Dragon Island. Father wants to be by your side," Rankster said to Yabamiya. He owed the 2 sisters too much. He wanted to give them more companionship and care, as well as guide them in their cultivation and growth. "Father, I don't want to go back to Dragon Island. I want to stay in Chaos City." Mia shook her head and looked at Rankster with a determined gaze. "Why?" Rankster frowned slightly. "Don't you want to go back to Father's side?" "No, I just don't want to leave Chaos City and the restaurant." Mia shook her head and smiled at Rankster. As for the reason, Father should have found the answer after trying all the dishes on the menu. Rankster was very embarrassed. He looked at the mischievous smile on Mia's face. He didn't expect this last to recognize him. Although the food in Mamie restaurant is indeed very delicious, as a giant dragon, we have to become more powerful and see a wider world. That's what we should do. We can't be too greedy for a comfortable place, Rankster said with a serious expression. "So, this is the reason why you left back then? For a wider sky?" Mia looked at him and retorted, "Rankster, I don't pursue invincible power, and I don't like the vast sky and world outside. I like Mamie's, I like everyone here, I like the boss's food, and I like every child who comes to the ice cream shop. This is the life I want, I want to stay here. This is my decision, Mia said with a serious and determined expression. Rankster looked at Mia and seemed to see the shadow of that stubborn girl again. Memories of the past surged into his mind and made his heart waver. Yes. So what if he became stronger? They had all left, and he was the only one left. Even if he was invincible and had no one to drink with. Boring. Boring. Father, you can stay in Chaos City for a while. I think you will like it here, and we can see each other every day, Mia said with a smile. All right, then I will stay here for a while. Rankster nodded. Chapter 22:57. Elizabeth watched this scene with a smile. She looked at Mia with gratification and admiration. Mia had bravely said what she wanted and dared to persist. She didn't have such courage. Since she was young, many people had placed their hopes on her. They wanted her to become like that, but no one had ever asked her if she really wanted to become like that. I want to stay too, Elizabeth said. Mia and Rankster turned to look at her at the same time. Mia's eyes lit up as if she knew something. Rankster was a little puzzled. He looked at Elizabeth and asked, Elizabeth, do you want to stay in Chaos City too? No, I want to stay in Mamie's too, Elizabeth said seriously as she looked into Rankster's eyes. This time, she also wanted to say her true thoughts. This time, it was Rankster's turn to be stunned. His two precious daughters were both going to stay in Mamie's as waitresses. Rankster's daughter, the princess of the Frost Dragon tribe, was actually going to stay in Mamie's as waitresses? That's great. Big sister, you should stay with me in the future. Mia had already run over and was happily holding Elizabeth's arm with a smile. Elizabeth patted her hand and continued to look at Rankster. Fox had died in her hands, and she was already the candidate to be the next chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. On the way to Chaos City, Rankster had already discussed with her about letting her succeed him. He intended to groom her to become the chief in these 2 years and secure her position. Yes, still no one cared if she was willing or not. They only felt that she should be in that position. So, she wanted to tell her father today that she wasn't willing. At least, she wasn't willing now. Compared to that cold frost throne, she preferred the warm and comfortable atmosphere at Mamie's. Those covetous gazes that coveted that ice-cold throne made people unable to eat or sleep in peace. But here, they could open their hearts and treat it with sincerity. This was the life she yearned for and missed. In the past, her goal had been to find her father. Now that this goal had been achieved, she wanted to stop for a while and stay here with Mia and all the people who cared about her. Rankster looked at Elizabeth. He was proud of this daughter who had inherited his powerful talent and fighting ability. He didn't seem to really understand her. If you're willing to stay, then stay. Lancaster nodded and went along with her wishes. After coming back from the ice fields of the extreme north, he knew how much Elizabeth had suffered and gone through to find her. In the end, he still couldn't harden his heart to let her bear his will and ambition. Amy's was really a strange place. It could actually charm his two daughters so much that they didn't want to go home. Father, do you have a place to stay? If you do, I'll go to bed with my sister first. See you tomorrow. Mia held Elizabeth's hand as she looked at Rankster. Yes. Rankster nodded and was about to say something. Then see you tomorrow? But before he could say anything, the two girls had already walked away and turned into an alley at the side. These two girls! Rankster couldn't help but laugh. He slowly lowered his raised hand and looked at the ring in his palm. He softly said to himself, Don't worry. From now on, I will protect her for the rest of my life. Mother left the ring for me. I'll take it. Mia ran over like the wind and grabbed the ring from Rankster's hand. Then, she hugged Rankster gently and smiled. Good night, father. Then, she ran away. Rankster looked at Mia's back and laughed. This girl's personality was much more unpredictable than Elizabeth's. It made him a little uncomfortable. However, this feeling was not bad. He suddenly felt like he had a mischievous sweetheart. Sister, I was so worried about you these few days, Mia said softly as she hugged Elizabeth's arm tightly. I'm fine. I just want to look for father. Elizabeth shook her head with a smile. However, she felt Mia's concern and felt warm in her heart. Mia took out the key to open the door of the dormitory. When she pushed the door open, there was a loud bang, and fireworks flew everywhere. "Welcome home, Elizabeth." Elizabeth and Yabamia stood at the door and were stunned when they saw everyone standing in the living room with a cake in their hands and smiling. "Wow, what a surprise." Mia's eyes lit up. "Everyone?" Elizabeth's eyes shone. She suddenly felt a little cold, and her nose was a little stuffed. It turned out that apart from Mia, there were so many people who cared about her, doted on her, and cared about her. "It's cold outside. Come in quickly." Gina went forward and pulled Elizabeth's hand into the room. Mia closed the door, and there was only warmth left in the living room. "I've been away for so long. I missed you." Gina gave her a hug first. Hugging her soft body was warm and comfortable. "Although I'm not very good at expressing myself in this way, but let's hug." Barbara walked forward with a blush on her face. Elizabeth hugged her with a smile and whispered in her ear, "Thank you. Sister Elizabeth, I'll treat you to a drink later." "I have the best rum," Hannah said with a smile as she hugged her. "Sure." Elizabeth nodded. "Sister Elizabeth, it's great that you're back." Jane went forward and hugged Elizabeth with a sincere smile. "Good girl." Elizabeth smiled and patted Jane's head. Although the golden-horned little girl didn't talk much, she had always been very obedient. Angela was the last to go forward. She also hugged Elizabeth. However, after hugging her, she muttered softly, "She looks cold, but it's so soft and warm when I hug her. It's so comfortable. So big." Elizabeth's body stiffened slightly. Angela took a step back and looked at her and Mia with a smile. "Mia, I'm so scared of sleeping alone at night. Can I sleep with you guys?" "Sure." Mia nodded innocently. "No." Elizabeth rejected decisively. "All right, then let's sleep together when we have the chance." Angela shrugged and didn't force her. "Then let's eat cake," Gina said. "Where did this cake come from?" Mia asked in surprise. She had been learning how to make cakes recently, but she hadn't mastered it yet. "Then, who made this cake?" "Me." Gina raised her hand and smiled. "I made it with ice cream. It's an ice cream cake." "Time was tight, so we thought of this idea," Angela interrupted. "It looks like it'll be delicious." Hannah swallowed her saliva. Mia held back her laughter and said, "The boss wants to beat someone up." Chapter 2258. The next morning, Meg heard a knock on the door. When he opened the door, he saw Mia and Elizabeth standing outside. Surprise and joy appeared on his face. He smiled at Elizabeth and said, "You're back." I'm back." Elizabeth nodded with a smile on her cold face. There was no long speech or exaggerated reaction. It was just a simple, "I'm back," but it made Elizabeth's nose tingle. Yes, there was still a place in this world waiting for her to return. There were still some people who missed her. Meg let the two of them in first and poured them a glass of warm water as he said, "You're early today. Have a seat and play for a while. You can look at the menu. There are some new dishes recently. Tell me what you want to eat later." Elizabeth nodded with a smile on her face. She sat down with Yabamiya at the table near the kitchen. She flipped open the menu. There were indeed a few new dishes. There were soup dumplings and knife-shaved noodles. They all looked good. You can have a steamer of soup dumplings and a bowl of knife-shaved noodles. It's definitely a great combination, Mia recommended. Meg turned and went into the kitchen. He looked at the two sisters who were close to each other through the glass window. He thought that there must have been a touching scene of a father and daughter reuniting last night. He originally thought that Rankster would take Mia away. After all, he was a proud man. How could he tolerate his daughter working as a waitress in the restaurant? Unexpectedly, not only did Mia not leave, but Elizabeth also came back. Although he didn't know what happened, Meg could already imagine Rankster's expression. Elizabeth's return was of course a good thing for the restaurant that was relatively understaffed. Connie was busy with the Twilight Forest, and Camilla had returned to the Demon Islands to be the Vampire Queen. They were in need of manpower. "Oh yes, sister, You don't know that and has been super awesome recently. She has become a very famous artist. Mia got up and went behind the counter to take a picture book of mermaids. This was drawn by Anne? Elizabeth looked at the exquisite picture book in her hand in surprise. Yes, this is only one of them. She has drawn many more, and they are selling very well. There is a shortage every day. Mia nodded. That's amazing. Elizabeth couldn't help but praise as she flipped through the picture book. During breakfast, Meg officially announced Elizabeth's return. After dinner, let's stay for supper to celebrate Elizabeth's return, Meg announced. Okay, I'll try my best not to fall asleep for supper. Amy bit into a bun and nodded her head. Hope. Are you? I'll go to the school to check on the progress of the project and submit the list of names. Me? Gina was the first to sign up. Barbara raised her hand and said, I'm afraid that I won't be able to control myself from hitting those disobedient little fellows, so I can only attend 2 classes a week at most. I will use the rest of the time to calm myself down. Hannah said she wanted to teach the children how to brew wine. This was a very complicated subject. Even Meg couldn't figure it out, so he had to ask Luna to confirm it. Shirley wanted to be a shooting teacher. As an excellent elven archer, she was very willing to teach her archery skills to the children. Mia was very enthusiastic, but after thinking for a long time, she still couldn't think of anything she could teach the children, so she could only give up. I think and can teach the children how to draw. She draws so well. The children will definitely like it, Mia suggested. Everyone's gaze landed on Anne, who was eating a soup dumpling and sucking it in small mouthfuls, and paused. She looked up at everyone with her mouth slightly open. Her expression was puzzled. Anne, do you want to be a little teacher? Meg asked her with a smile. Anne's current drawing skills and standards were more than enough to be an art teacher, and was stunned. Then she shook her head and said with sign language, I don't know how to teach others how to draw. Then forget it. We'll talk about it when Anne wants to teach others how to draw. Meg nodded with a smile. He didn't force her, and couldn't speak yet. This was indeed a very big obstacle for teaching. During breakfast, Meg saw Rankster again. He was still dressed like a rich businessman from last night. Meg could feel a faint hostility from him. He obviously minded the fact that Meg had abducted his 2 daughters to be waitresses. However, although he was hostile, it didn't affect Lin Lee's appetite at all when he saw him eating soup dumplings. Looks like I have to sell a house first. I need a bigger one, so it's more convenient for the 2 children to live in. Of course, I'm staying here for the children, not for the food. Rankster came out of Mamie restaurant, and the sunlight on his face made him squint his eyes comfortably. Q. Eat breakfast and watch the children work. He seemed to have never lived so comfortably in his life. What should I do next? I'll go and find my old friends to chat. Julian seems to be living there. He didn't show any mercy the last time. Rankster mumbled as he walked to the magic potion shop at the side. He needed some time to adapt to this retirement life. Meg went to Hope School. The 4-story framework of the comprehensive teaching building had already been erected. The Night Elves construction team showed their professionalism. The hundreds of elves had a clear division of labor. The construction site was in full swing, and the construction was happening at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not far away, there were many teachers who were watching and exclaiming from time to time. Most people had the impression that the elves were elegant and noble, but it was easy to overlook their talent in construction. If they went to visit the ingenious buildings within the tall walls of the textile factory, they would definitely be shocked speechless. Meg confirmed the progress of the construction with the leader of the construction team. He confirmed the arrival time of the various kitchenware and furniture to ensure that the construction team could withdraw before school started so that it wouldn't affect the school's progress. Then, Meg found a teacher and asked for the location of the principal's office. Please come in. Meg put down his hand and heard a familiar voice coming from inside. He pushed the door open and went in. Luna looked up from a pile of documents. She was surprised to see Meg coming in. She put down her pen and stood up. Mr. Meg, why are you here? I'm here to check on the progress of the construction and discuss something with you. Did I disturb your work? Meg said with a smile. It's all right. I'm just confirming some construction matters. Please sit here. Luna let Meg sit down and made him a cup of tea. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.